We would like to begin this open presidential debate with a brief acknowledgement that we are gathered here on the ancestral lands of Native Americans. Long before colonization, Chicago was a central trade hub. The city name comes from the Algonquin people, who's called the river on which it sits, Chicago, the fragrant wild leeks that grew along its shore. Chicago was home to the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, which comprised the Council of the Three Fires. It was home to the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, Fox, Kickapoo, and Illinois nations. Through colonization, including bloody conflicts, forced removals, and unfair treaties, most Native Americans were forced out of the region. As President Abraham Lincoln himself oversaw the removal of countless indigenous people from indigenous lands, along with the death of thousands. Therefore, when we call this the land of Lincoln, it's important to understand the message that sends. It continues a narrative that is rooted in deceit, forced displacement, and murder. Every community thriving today owes its existence and vitality to the generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to make the history that led this very moment. Some were brought here against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant home in hopes of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We all share common bonds and values. We all want a better world for our loved ones and a brighter future. Thus, we are here to continue our collective cooperation to bring about the cultural changes that will transform the world. There are no problems, only solutions. This is my favorite quote by John Lennon, and it is an outlook that I strive to embody. It is a way of thinking that I believe, if adopted, has the power to transform our lives and revitalize our government. This is the inspiration behind creating an open presidential debate. This season, Free and Equal Elections has joined forces with our amazing co-hosts, Open the Debates, and so many incredible dedicated sponsors, including the Foundation for Harmony and Prosperity, Nexus, the Center for Election Science, Taxpayers United of America, Heartland Communities, Represent Us, National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, Independent Voter News, Ballot Access News, as well as the United We Stand tour stops, Earth Week, Thrive Fest Hawaii, Sister Winds Festival, Freedom Rising Converges, Need Peace, and Tribal Vision. I would like to take a moment to thank our media sponsors, Free Thought Project, The Mind Unleashed, Anti-Media, Collective Evolution, Fulcrum US, all who have shared our live stream today. I give recognition to individuals as well, including Catherine Gell, Frank Atwood of Approval Voting USA, David Bowden, Crystal Wagner, Justin Patak Agency, and Gennady Stolarov. The fascinating thing about the open presidential debate is that it's not a first of its kind. That it is a first of its kind, a unique debate with a focus on solutions, inclusion, and unity. Today we have gathered, once again, a truly diverse group of candidates. In addition to those debating, I would like to recognize candidates Andy Williams Jr., Phil Gray, and Elisa Miller, who are also here in our audience. Do you know over 1,000 people have filed with the FEC to run for president? I learned this from Richard Winger of Ballot Access News, election law expert. We really wish we had the capacity to hold a conversation with all 1,000 of them. However, we think it's healthy to have some sort of threshold. It's unclear that the thresholds set by the two major parties it's unconstitutional, these thresholds created by the two-party system, anti-democratic, unfair, and unreasonable. We hope you'll agree that our criteria for invitation has been constitutional, fair, and reasonable. Our blockchain election assistant app, launching this fall, will allow us to open our debates even more in the future by allowing the people to decide through alternative voting methods who will be chosen to participate in our rounds of debates. The current system leads us to believe that we're a divided people. We are not. And we refuse to have that illusionary stake driven further between us. We will break that illusion. We will rise above and unify to make our stand, demanding what is right for the American people. The corporate-sponsored television Commission on Presidential Debates represents the divisive side of our political culture, while we, in contrast, want to give a voice to the vast majority of people throughout the United States and world who are hungry for change. We want to help spread their message, for the messages to be heard while representing peace, love, and unity. These 18 candidates are demonstrating that Americans across the political spectrum can put their differences aside and come together to hold a decent conversation, express new ideas, and create solutions. This debate today was split into 2 segments with 9 candidates each. The first segment we have already concluded was from 2 to 5:30. We were all on stage at 6, and now we are here with all of our final 9 candidates, that is, for a debate from 6:30 to 10 p.m. Central. This debate is currently live streamed at freeandequal.org on our YouTube, Facebook, and shared by media sponsors that support our vision. This format will be a variation of the cumulative time format. This is a format that was created by the League of Women Voters of the U.S. After a brief introduction by myself, the moderator, each candidate will have an opportunity to make an opening statement of 2 minutes. The order for the statements will be determined at random. Candidates will have 2 minutes to answer each question. Each candidate will have a total of 3 more opportunities to take 1 additional minute to offer a rebuttal or expand upon their previous answer. For instance, that is, you could use your extra minute on each of the first 3 questions, or you could choose to save them for the last 3 questions. You may use any of your extra minutes on the same question after each candidate has had an opportunity to use 1 in order to encourage a free exchange of ideas. Extra minutes do not carry on into closing statements. We've been a little bit fluid on that today. Each candidate will be permitted a 2-minute closing statement. At the conclusion of each debate, we will ask our audience to vote for their favorite candidates using an alternative voting method known as approval voting. This poll is sponsored by the Center for Election Science and available at Free and Equal, that's freeandequal.org. Let the open presidential debate begin. We're going to start with our 2-minute opening statement for each candidate. So we'll start with Mosey Boyd of the Democratic Party.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. My name is Mosey Boyd, and as I said earlier, I'm running for the Democratic nomination for president. I am running for president to rebuild patriotism by uniting Americans around our shared values. I think we have way too much noise at the extremes of both parties, and we need to come back to the middle and focus on serving the American people. I want to just thank everyone for participating in this, but I also want to call for some gratitude for the system that we do have that nominates our major party candidates. I think a lot of hard work goes into that process, and as we just heard, it's not possible to invite 1,000 people to come speak here, and I think there has to be some mechanism for focusing, and I have not participated in the mainstream debates, but I do think that there are some threshold issues, and I understand that. So I'm grateful to be able to participate here this evening, but I do think that we need to appreciate the hard work that everybody else is doing in this process. I want to focus on asking everybody in this election to remember that we're all Americans and that we're all on the same team. And everybody's action and everybody's participation in this election is important. So I commend everyone for standing up for their beliefs and for participating. I think as we're moving down the field and we're playing offense, trying to win this election in the fall, we don't just want the folks in the middle, and we don't just want the folks on the right, and we don't just want the folks on the left. We want everybody on the team to be working the ball together as a coordinated effort. And so sometimes I'm going to see something that you might not see, and sometimes you're going to see something that I might not see. And I think listening to each other is a very important part of this process, and being respectful of everyone who's involved. So I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be here this evening.
Thank you, Mosey. Again, when you speak in the mic, try to keep a distance so the noise stays clear for production, so they can hear us from here. I've been trained last debate. So, Zoltan Isvan of the Republican Party.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zoltan Isvan, and I'm running for president as a Republican. First, I just want to thank everyone, Christine, and all the different people that have really contributed to making this happen. I feel it's incredibly important to have a debate such as this where people can come together, have different opinions, and also just, a lot of us smaller candidates, lesser known candidates are fighting to get recognition. So this gives us something where we can all get together and make a strong push. And I really can't emphasize how important that is for all of us who are kind of dedicating a year, 2 years to running for the presidency to try to bring in new ideas and maybe even win. What most people know me for is the field of transhumanism. I'm a public figure in the science and technology advocacy world. Transhumanism, you probably have never heard of it, some of you, is the field of using science and technology to radically improve the human being and also to improve the human experience. It can be anything from exoskeleton suits that get disabled people to walk. It can be robotic eyes. It can be even things like driverless cars. But whatever it is, it's one of the most important fields of science that are about to hit the planet and our species. It's going to change things as we start doing things like, have headsets that allow us to communicate directly into the cloud and maybe even have brain implants like Elon Musk is working on. It's also different. It sounds a little bit crazy, but believe me, I'm from Silicon Valley. I can tell you hundreds of millions of dollars are going into fields like that. In fact, billions of dollars are now going into the field of anti-aging, where people are trying to overcome death. My presidential candidacy is very much based upon a platform of science and technology buffered by another single concept called a universal basic income, because I think we're going to get to a future where we're going to have all this radical science and technology in our lives and maybe even be cyborgs or some other kinds of species here in the future, but capitalism probably won't survive, and we'll need some type of basic income to get our society to the next era. A lot of people say I'm the Star Trek candidate, and that may be the case, but that's why I'm running for president.
Thank you. Ken Armstrong of the Libertarian Party.
Hi there, my name is Ken. I'm running as a Libertarian for president, and I'd love to convince you that I'm the most qualified person to run. I could tell you all about my time as an elected official in Honolulu County, as a commander of a NATO base in Europe, as the U.S. consul representative to the Pelagi Islands. I could tell you about a lot of things that I've done, but what I'd really like to take this time to talk about is the last 10 months, where we've gone from absolute obscurity to being a force to be dealt with inside of the Libertarian Party, and we hope soon within the nation. But my wife Dawn and my road manager Earl and I have been on the road for 10 months now. We've covered more than 40,000 miles. We haven't slept in our own beds in that entire time. We have met thousands of people. And in that time, we have discovered that this is not the country that you hear about on Fox News or CNN. This is an entirely different country. The media wants to convince you that we are a nation divided, and they want to divide us further because they make money at that. We are not that nation. We are a nation of wonderful people who want good things for each other. And what we're going to talk about here this evening is how we can achieve those things together. Armstrong2020.com.
Adam Kokesh.
Thank you, Christina, and to Free and Equal for putting this together, and to all of you for being here, and for everybody who supports presidential candidates and any candidates for office outside of the two old parties. We're coming to a tipping point. Is America ready to overthrow the duopoly? Yeah. I think so. You ever feel, and with due credit to South Park here, that when you're looking at the old party choices for candidate, you're being forced to choose between a giant douche and a turd sandwich? Now, when you're voting for the duopoly, that's throwing your vote away. And with all due respect to all the candidates here and who are on the earlier panel, what are we, and all of them I think are well-intentioned, would certainly be better than Cheeto Jesus or Sleepy Joe or Gropey Joe or whatever you want to call him, or the angry socialist who just wants every American to have their very own vacation home. What are we offering here but a buffet of turd sandwiches? You have to be a psychopath to want to be president of the United States, to say, I'm going to taste a little bit less bad than the other sandwiches that you have to choose from. We don't have to fall for this system anymore. And I think that being president automatically turns you into Gollum. You're putting on the ring of power, a ring that shouldn't exist, doing the most un-American thing possible, forcing people into a system that they don't want to be a part of, that doesn't represent them. My platform is fundamentally different because it is based on throwing the ring directly into the fire, taking the federal government through a bankruptcy process that leaves us with 50 independent states and up to 562 sovereign native nations, because I want to see government localized down to the community level where everybody gets what they want. Let's take back the power to our communities and overthrow the duopoly. Thank you very much. My website is thefreedomline.com.
Thank you. Howie Hawkins of the
Good
Green
evening.
Party.
Say what?
Howie Hawkins of the Green Party.
Yes, and we're trying to get left unity. I'm also the nominee of the Socialist Party, and I'm running in a number of where there's state progressive parties, and trying to build a mass party of the left. I'm a recently retired from 50 years of working as a construction worker and then humping freight in warehouses as a teamster. And that was to pay the rent. What I've really been about is building a movement of the working class, independent of the two capitalist parties, for democracy, socialism, and ecology. I've been committed to that since the 60s. I got involved in the civil rights, anti-war ecology movement back then in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I got involved in the Green Party when we started forming it in 1984. The Greens in New York have run me for governor 3 times. We got enough vote to get a ballot line. We got 5% once against Governor Cuomo. He was trying to run up the vote. We get more than his daddy got, Mario Cuomo. And he got less, and he had to see what we were talking about. We were talking about a ban on fracking, a $15 minimum wage, paid family leave, and some other things, but he moved on those issues because he had to compete for our votes. So don't think you have to win the office to make change. And that's why it's so important. That's what third parties have done historically in this country. They put issues on the table that major parties won't deal with. Like the Liberty Party put the question of slavery on the table. The Socialist Party put social insurance programs that got adopted during the New Deal period. So we're not marginal. We've been central to progressive politics in this country since the Working Men's Party in 1829. So I don't think anybody should underestimate what we can do here. Now, my campaign has 2 goals: to build the Green Party and left unity, and to put demands into the national debate. We're going for all 50 state ballot lines, federal matching funds so we can get on those ballots. And I mentioned some of the issues earlier, and I'm running out of time, but we'll get to them. So thank you.
Joe Jorgensen, Libertarian Party.
This debate is important because the Democrats and Republicans will stop at nothing to squash all other voices from being heard. It's how they stay in power. They think that they can solve our problems, but they're the ones who cause the problems. It's the government that drove up the healthcare costs that are hurting so many Americans today. It's the government who drove up college tuition, creating the student loan crisis that we currently have. It's the government who is now attacking the gig economy, like Uber and Airbnb. And it's the federal government and its policies that have helped create our pollution problems. In fact, the federal government is the largest polluter. So why would we go to them for help when they're the ones causing the problems? Libertarians are the only ones who are trying to take the power away from the special interests of government and put it back into the hands of the people. Libertarians are the only ones who think that we should have a choice in how we live our lives. And libertarians are the only ones who say, yes, you know how to live your life better than the government knows how you should live your life. My website is joj2020.com. Also, I'd love for you to visit lp.org. Thank you.
Vermin Supreme, Libertarian Party.
One, two, three. My name is Vermin, and I like a pony. And if you don't like it, well, I say baloney. I can't complain. I braid her mane. The way that pony makes me feel is driving me insane. I like a pony. I like to ride her hard. I ride my pony all around the yard. I have a pony. My pony likes to buck. Me and my pony, we love to ride around the town, ride around the town. Gonna ride my pony to my hotel pool. Yeah, I'm gonna see her swim. I'm gonna ride my pony to my hotel room. Yeah, I'm gonna let her in. My pony's in the sun, son. My pony's having fun, son. Ponies like to run, son. Phaser set on stun, yeah. Everybody wants a pony. Everybody gets a pony. Hi, I'm Vermin Supreme from the internet. You may recognize me from such great hits as Gingivitis, Free Ponies, or Glitter Bombs. This year, however, I am running a decidedly more serious campaign, and I have thrown my lot in with the Libertarian Party because they are indeed and in fact the party of self-expression, the individual, and things like that. So, fact of the matter is, I am the voice of a new generation, and thanks you for listening. Have a nice day.
Can I trade in the pony for a unicorn, Vermin? Huh, Vermin?
Pardon?
Can I trade in the pony for a unicorn?
There are conversion kits available.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Just want to make sure. All right. Going somewhere. All right. Thank you. Mark Charles, Independent.
Yat A. Mark Charles Yenshia. Sin Baketanet initially, to Tohiguni Basichin. Sin Baketanet Dashachader to the Chitni Dashanella. In the Navajo culture, when we introduce ourselves, we always give our 4 clans. We're matrilineal as a people, and our identities come from our mother's mother. My mother's mother is American of Dutch heritage, which is why I say Sin Baketanet initially. Loosely translated, that means I'm from the wooden shoe people. My second clan, my father's mother, is Tohiglini, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Tsinbake Dinea. And my fourth clan, my father's father, is Todachitni. That's the Bitterwater clan. It's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. I wanted to thank you, Christine, for doing a land acknowledgement when we started this process. Everywhere I go around the country, I like to acknowledge the people whose land I'm on. And I am very honored and grateful that you did that here as an organization. And I also just want to say, as a Navajo man and a Dutch man, the son of both my mother and my father, that I am deeply honored to be on the land of the Kickapoo, the Peoria, the Potawatomi, and the Miami. I am grateful for the stewardship they've had of these lands. I am grateful for the honor of letting me be on these lands. I am grateful for the stories that have taken place on these lands. These are the nations that lived here, they hunted here, they fished here, they farmed here. These were the nations that raised their families here and buried their dead here. And these are the nations that were removed from these lands so that the state of Illinois, the city of Chicago, and the state of Indiana could be built up. And I like to acknowledge these lands, these people wherever I go, no matter whose land I'm on, because it's important to remember that these lands were not discovered. And second, it helps us to conduct ourselves with greater humility, understanding that there's a story to these lands that predates what we're given in our history books. So, ahiahat for allowing me to be here today, and I'm looking forward to the dialogue that we're going to have.
And Gloria La Riva, Party for Socialism and Liberation.
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank Christine Tobin and the organizers in the Free and Equal Presidential Debate, the Foundation, for giving us this opportunity. And my name is Gloria LaRiva. I am running for president for the Party for Socialism and Liberation, along with my running mate, Vice Presidential candidate Leonard Peltier, a native traditionalist and political prisoner who is still serving time despite his innocence for 44 years now. He is in Coleman Prison in Florida. And part of our campaign is helping to raise his profile across the country to demand his freedom now, along with other political prisoners like Mumia Abu-Jamal, Mutulu Shakur, Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, and many others. We will appear on state ballots across the country for the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and last night I won the primary in California for Peace and Freedom Party. The nominating convention will be in August, and I'm confident that I will win that nomination in California. We have a 10-point program. I won't go into details except in the discussion later, but I welcome people to look up our website at larivapeltier2020.org. What we witnessed last night on Super Tuesday was very revealing that the Democratic Party establishment gathered up their other candidates to back behind the scenes to back Biden and stop the surge of a mass radical movement that's embodied in the Bernie Sanders campaign. That's more than a campaign. It is a movement of primarily youth and people of color who are demanding a radical change for healthcare, housing, free education. And this is what the ruling class, and I do mean the ruling class, made up of the bankers and corporate tycoons, the military-industrial complex, is so fearful of a mass movement that we are part of, and this is what we need to make real change in this country and to fight for socialism.
Thank you. So we're going to start with our first question. Since Mosey started with the opening statement, our first question will go to Zoltan, and each question will move down the line for as we roll along. This one is, we'll do this question, and we're going to mix it up a little bit after this, too. The Commission on Presidential Debates prevents nearly all candidates outside the two-party system from participating in national debates. What reforms would you implement to prevent this injustice? Zoltan, is fun.
Well, I think if you got an independent presidential candidate like myself into the White House, I would probably, through an executive order, say, and this is because I've run as a nominee for the Transhumanist Party. I've also run as a gubernatorial candidate for the Libertarian Party. And even though I'm running as a Republican now, I might run as a Democrat, I might run somewhere else. I think third-party candidates should have access to debates, because without national debates, it's almost impossible to really make a real impact. So through an executive order, I would say third-party candidates, at least some, maybe the top 5, must be included, at least in, let's say, 30% of the debates, so that we can have that national dialogue. And through time, through a period of maybe 4 or 5 debates, you'd be able to kind of say, well, some made it, some didn't, through either winning a debate. But it has to be done through an executive order by the president, and I would do that.
Thank you. Ken Armstrong.
Well, I don't disagree with Zoltan that executive orders are useful, but part of the problem in our country today is this notion of the imperial president who can cause everything to happen by executive order. What we need to do is pressure Congress to do their job. And one of the things they need to do is to roll back the restrictive acts that started in the 1970s through the election acts and the creation of the Federal Election Commission that have systematically stripped the American people of their rights to run candidates of various parties and various backgrounds. They did it strictly to increase their own power. They've been very successful at that. It was very well played. It just was played against the interests of the American people.
Thank you.
So can I jump in now?
After everybody responds, then you can use one of your rebuttals or extensions once everybody's had their response. So Adam Kokesh.
Well, Christina, I know this is a question that's near and dear to your heart and to so many other activists, and I really do applaud the work that you do with Free and Equal and what so many others do, and especially within the Libertarian Party, fighting for ballot access, collecting signatures, just getting some principled alternatives on the ballot. Honestly, in a bigger perspective, I see this as kind of rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, though. And the value in it is not just that you say, look, we're going to fix this, we're going to tinker with the system, and we're going to make this fundamentally unfair criminal system fair or free and equal, but that you expose the inherent criminality of it. You expose the fact that they want to keep independent voices out. You expose that this whole system is set up to exploit you. And I think that what we see, the financial system that's behind this, the banking system, the corporatism, it's not sustainable. And it's crazy to think that we're gonna fix this one little thing and that's what's gonna solve all of our problems. Like if we could just get the right people in charge, or if we could just get the flow of elections to be a little more fair, what we are coming to is a dangerous point of failure. I mean, no matter how you look at it financially, this system is not sustainable. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, the dollar gets worth less and less, your retirement gets worth less and less. Americans are struggling more and more. What I'm proposing with this platform is, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The hard way is keep your heads buried in the sand and hope that government spares you in its violent death throes as it desperately clings to power. The easy way is to apply a solution as big as the problem, something that actually gets to the heart of what we have with a criminal, centralized, coercive government. We can do better than this. America is fundamentally too good for this government.
Thank you. Howie Hawkins.
We don't have to elect a president to open up the debates. Let's be clear, the Commission on Presidential Debates is not a government agency. They make it sound like that. It's a private corporation. The Democrats and Republicans set up. They muscled aside the League of Women Voters that used to do the debates so they could control who got into the debates. We can change that. We need to uplift the League of Women Voters. They've done it in states. In New York, I've run against Cuomo 3 times. I ran against Hillary Clinton. And the damn commercial media, they're so interested in getting access to these powerful people that they wait until those candidates say, I will debate at this time in this place with these candidates, instead of what they should do, be independent media that's a watchdog on these politicians, and they set up the media and tell the politicians, here's what's going to happen. And they can do that with the League of Women Voters. We should be pushing the League nationally, along with Free and Equal, which is a much smaller organization, and the commercial media, and shame the commercial media for being so, bootlicking to these politicians, to have real debates. And you can set up some objective criteria. You got on enough ballots to win the Electoral College. Now, we got to change that too, but that's another question. So we don't have to win the election to do that. And this is so important because right now we got what the framers feared most, a two-party system, where you get the tyranny of the majority because the two factions, it's a life or death struggle, and they give us the illusion of choice. Because when the election's over and the doors are closed and the Democrats and Republicans get together, they're doing business. It's pro-corporate economics, it's pro-corporate imperialism, and if you know local politics, it's the real estate industry. If you're in rural Republican, it's crooked Republicans. If you're in a city, it's crooked Democrats. The real estate industry runs it. We need a multi-party democracy, and I'm out of time. So I want to say more about that when I get more time in my rebuttal.
Thank you. Me. Joe Jorgensen.
Sure, we can get more people in the debates, but that doesn't really solve the basic problem. The problem is government has too much power, so it's worth it for people to, for instance, in Illinois, Rod Blagojevich. I would like to see a government small enough, just like our founders intended, so it wouldn't be worth selling off seats, so it wouldn't be worth keeping other people out of the debates, so it wouldn't be worth other people trying to muscle in. I look at voting libertarian as an act of self-defense. I would like to see a government so small that it really didn't matter if you voted or not because you got to live your life how you wanted to, not how the politicians want you to. I want a government so small that corporations can't be in charge, that corporations can't buy off the special interests in the politicians. So that if we had a president, people would yawn and say, well, you know what? It doesn't affect my day-to-day life. That's the kind of country we need to go towards, where people are in charge and government doesn't run every little aspect of our everyday life so that we just don't care who's in the debate. Thank you.
Yes, it seems like the Commission on Presidential Debates is one of many tools the party systems, maybe one of the most powerful tools that they use to create this false illusion, that there's only a two-party, really one-party duopoly. So, with you on that. Berman, Supreme.
Yeah, so we must smash the duopoly and smash the state, all in one fell swoop, if at all possible, which is, of course, it's not. But I very much like debating. I very much like participating in democracy, and I very much enjoy exercising my free speech First Amendment rights in such a manner. Unfortunately, there are indeed a number of blockades in the way. There are things that do not allow people to access the political process in a easy way. And yes, we do have to work on these things as Americans, as society. And we do need to destroy the Presidential Debate Commission and toss it back to the League of Women's Voters and Free and Equal and other such organizations. Absolutely. Thank you. I'm Vermin Supreme. VerminSupreme2020.com. Thank you.
And yes, Berman, we have invited the League of Women Voters, U.S., to be a part of all of our debates, and we hope that they do one day. We welcome
Me too.
them.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, so Mark Charles.
Before I begin, I'd like a clarification on the rules. Can I use one of my extra minutes to keep talking, or do I need to wait until everybody's over?
This series, I have allowed the last round of debates where if you're actually speaking and you want to use one of your extensions, you can go ahead and do that. And
I
make
may
3
end up
minutes
doing
on
that,
a
so we'll
topic you're
see.
really passionate
This
about.
is important to talk about, so I may end up using 1, 2, or who knows, maybe even all 3 of my minutes. But
And you
we
can
can
use
start
one
now.
for your closing statement as
So,
well, so please.
One of the big things we have to discuss is why do we have the problems we have? And the challenge is not rooted in one single party or one single commission. The challenge is rooted in our foundations. And I want to go back to the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a series of papal bulls written between 1452 and 1493. They're essentially the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever land you find not ruled by white European Christian rulers, those people are subhuman and their land is yours to take. This is literally the doctrine that European nations go into Africa, colonize the continent, and enslave the people. They didn't believe Africans to be human. It's the same doctrine that let Columbus, who was lost at sea, land in this new world already inhabited by millions and claim to discover it. You can't discover lands already inhabited. If you don't believe me, leave your cell phones, your laptops, your car keys out. I'll come by and discover them for you. It's not discovery, it's stealing. The fact that we refer to it as discovery reveals the bias, which is that native peoples, people of color, are not human. So the doctrine of discovery is a systemically white supremacist doctrine. Now this gets embedded into our foundations. The Declaration of Independence, 30 lines below the statement on men are created equal, refers to natives as merciless Indian savages. The only reason the founding fathers used this inclusive term all men, because they had a very narrow definition of who was actually human. This makes our Declaration of Independence a systemically white supremacist document. Our Constitution, which begins with the words, we the people. Just a few lines later, Article 1, Section 2, the section that determines who is and who is not a part of this union, who is and who is not covered by this document. If you read Article 1, Section 2, the first thing you have to note is it never mentions women. If you read the entire document from preamble to the 27th Amendment, you'll find that there are 51 gender-specific male pronouns. 51 he, him, and his, who can run for office, who can hold office, even who's protected by this document. There's not a single female pronoun in the entire Constitution. Second, Article 1, Section 2 specifically excludes natives. Third, it counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. So who's left? White men. And technically it was white landowning men who could vote. See, we don't think about this enough. The reason we have a constitution is not for freedom and equality. It's to protect the interests of white landowning men. So we act surprised today that women earn 60 to 70 cents to the dollar. This isn't surprising. The Constitution's working. We act surprised our prisons are filled with people of color. This is not surprising. The Constitution's working. We act surprised that in 2010, the Supreme Court sided with Citizens United, rules that corporations are now have the same rights to political free speech as individuals. This opens the door for super PACs, unlimited support for candidates. This is not surprising. The Constitution is doing what it's designed to do, is protecting the interests of white landowning men. And so I'm going to go one more minute.
That was 3.
Yeah.
We did 3, right? We did 3 already.
Oh, I thought I had 5.
We added on its 2 minutes response, and we added a minute on, so that was 3 minutes.
I thought I could add any of my 3 minutes. That's what I was confused on. I apologize.
Oh, go ahead, if you want to use your second rebuttal.
I'd like to.
Followed it.
This
Okay.
is important.
Please.
We have to acknowledge that when our foundations were written, we the people never meant all the people. And this is the way the system works today. And this is why voting works the way it works. This is why gerrymandering is approved by the Supreme Court. It's because it's a part of our foundations. And so if we want to fix the problem, it's not going to be about appointing a new commission or having a different voting style. We need to deal with the foundations and decide as a country, do we really want to be a place where we the people means all the people, where you can run for president and you can gain access to the platforms to speak your mind? And until we decide that we want we the people to mean all the people, then we are never going to solve that problem. And that is what my campaign is about, to call the question, to build a nation where for the very first time we the people might truly mean all the people.
Gloria La Riva.
Yes, I believe that we're long past the possibility of reform in the election system of the United States. In any regard, when you look across this country, whether it's state or federal or even local, the requirements and restrictions are getting even tighter and tighter. In California, for example, you have the top 2, where despite the fact that Peace and Freedom Party is on the ballot along with other third parties, unless you're one of the 2 top vote getters in primaries, you're knocked off the ballot in March, for example, and you cannot be in the general election as before. In New York State, largely because of the Bernie Sanders phenomenon in 2016, what used to take in 2016 15,000 valid signatures to qualify for a presidential candidate in New York, it's been moved up several months earlier, the deadline, and now you have to get over 40,000 valid signatures, making it pretty impossible for parties to get on the ballot that are not Democrat and Republican, and they don't have to petition across the country. There have been things like equal access to the media. That doesn't exist anymore. And therefore, this perfect machinery of control that makes people in this country believe that if you vote, you've had your say and that's it. That's your only political participation. We're breaking through that. I think that the Bernie Sanders movement has shown that the road to real change is not going to happen hoping for the Democrats to nominate Bernie Sanders, but a real independent movement that fights for all people's rights. And I would go further than Mark. I agree with so much of what you're saying. It's not just keeping white landowning men, it's keeping the capitalists in power, what the intention of the elections is.
And Gloria, I agree with you on the independent movement. As I sit here today, I see every single one of you as individuals that are not, I mean, whether you're with the party line or not, I see individuals that care about our country, you know, parties aside. So I do see an independent candidates movement rising. Mosey, if you, the final to answer this question, please go ahead, Mosey Boyd.
Thank you.
And then we can do extensions, rebuttals.
This brings to mind the statement I've heard many times that we have the worst form of government except for all the rest. And I don't think necessarily that that is a 100% fair statement, but I do think it points us to the concept of what I feel is gratitude. And I know that we have a flawed system, and I know that our government in many forms, in many instances, has made many mistakes. But I also feel like our mistakes do not define us, and that we have a system that is available for influence if we engage the levers of influence. And I'm excited that we're all here tonight to participate and to share, express our voices and share our ideas. And I will say that some of this listening for me is stretching and painful, because I don't always agree with everything that everyone up here is sharing. But I do think that listening is valuable. So I would encourage everyone to engage the mechanisms that we do have available for influence. Most of our elected officials are available to visit. If you can't visit with them in person, you can visit with their staff. They listen when you write letters and you make phone calls and you write letters to the editor. And so there are many, many mechanisms that we can engage to have influence. And I want to encourage everyone to engage those levers. And one of the common ways that those in power typically influence others to repress participation or to depress turnout is by talking so negative that people get disengaged and discouraged. So as we're here participating tonight, I would like to remind us to rise to the occasion and focus on the positives, because the positives encourage greater participation.
Thank you. Howie, you'd like to?
Yeah, I want to use one of my minutes.
You got it.
First of all, in New York, it's not because Bernie Sanders was running, because he endorsed Clinton. He's going to endorse Biden if he loses, and the Democrats get those votes in the end. He's worried about parties like the Green Party, like when we got 5% in 2014. That's competing for the votes. That's why Cuomo changed the law. Bernie's bringing people into Cuomo's party. So let's be clear about that. Now, I mentioned earlier that the two-party system's dangerous because of the tyranny of the majority. Republicans got control of the executive branch now. They're getting the judges, and they want to hold on to that power. They think the Democrats are an existential threat. The other way around, the Democrats see Trump as an existential threat. If you had a multi-party democracy, you would have shifting coalitions, shifting majorities. It would pay to campaign positively and build new coalitions. Adam and I would be on the same side on anti-war stuff. We'd probably on opposite sides on economic stuff. And the parties would shift, and you would have a much more constructive, positive system. What we got now was formed in 1430, about the same time as the doctrine of discovery, which is plurality winner election systems. We're still using a system developed in the middle of the Middle Ages. So we got to go to proportional representation. And I'm out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other exceptions? Zoltan.
Look, I hate to be the semi-authoritarian in the room, but nobody has given an answer except for myself on what can be done in next January. Sometimes I think the executive branch has to take the power and clean up the field and say, look, it's almost like the Olympics. We just have rules on how you compete in certain races. And right now, the rules have been designed to keep out people like us. We just simply have to have one person that goes in there, obviously the president, and just put its fist down and say, look, from now on, we're going to have third-party candidates in and other candidates to make this a true democracy. And unfortunately, while I know a lot of the libertarians are going to say, oh, that's a violation of power and too much government, sometimes it takes a strong hand in order to get something like that done for the greater good, so that we have more freedom, we have more equality, and we have more democracy. And of course, I would be the person to do that on day one in office.
Anyone else? All right. So moving on to our second question, we'll start with Ken Armstrong to answer this one. It's no longer the hanging Chad in Florida on election night. There are now multiple ways for voter fraud to occur, including hack apps and minute-related voting machine apps. I think I misspoke. It's been a long day. There are no multiple ways for voter fraud to occur, including hack apps and minute-related voting machines. How would you ensure a fair and correct result in any upcoming election? Ken Armstrong.
Wow, okay, give me a tough one, okay? This is really a huge challenge to us to protect our freedoms and at the same time make sure that qualified or qualified, and by that I mean people with rights are voting. So what we need to do, we refer often to the lower level offices in government, and what we need to do is start thinking of them as the upper level governments in office. We need to reverse the pyramid, and we need to put the president at the bottom of the pyramid. But in that respect, what we need to do is empower local communities to ensure that what's happening in their voting booths is fair and honest and legitimate. One of the reasons why so much abuse is happening right now is because so much power is being taken away from the local communities in terms of the voting booth. The federal government and state governments are demanding so much of the local communities. When we empower local communities to act in their best interests, they generally rise above the muck and the mire of the higher levels of government.
Thank you. Let me repeat the question because I misspoke. It's no longer the hanging Chad in Florida on election night. There are now multiple ways for voter fraud to occur, including hack apps and minute-related voting machines. How would you ensure a fair and correct result in any upcoming election? Adam Kokesh.
Well, I'm going to take the bait that Zoltan put out there, and I'll be the libertarian who will say, yes, Zoltan, that would be an abuse of power. Yes, and Christina, the crux of your question is, how do you prevent fraud? Well, the whole system is fundamentally fraudulent. To say that if the majority votes for something, they get to force their opinion on the minority, this is set up as a system that is inherently bad for minorities. That's the fraud of the system, that you're going to be forced into a centralized system where you don't have the ability to opt out, to declare your independence, as this country was formed by. And right now, this centralized system, we see how corrupt, we see how evil, we see all of the negative consequences of this that make life worse for the average American. We are more polarized than we've ever been before. There are secession movements all over the country. Cal-Exit, I just got to speak at an event in Sacramento a few weeks ago where the California independence movement, they want California to break off from the rest of the country, say, we don't have to be a part of this anymore. We don't need to be at each other's throats. And it's really sad today, if you're a conservative and you meet a liberal on the street, you kind of have to see each other as enemies. And I would really echo Ken's sentiments here and say we need to go a step further to systemic structural reorganization to empower communities so that we can meet each other as friends, as fellow Americans, and say, well, hey, if you want to live that way over there in your community, I love you for that. I respect you living that way. And I'm going to live over here in my community a different way. And I hope that you'll respect that too. And we won't endorse any longer this current centralized coercive system that is tearing America apart.
Thank you, Adam. Howie Hawkins.
Well, the first thing we need to do is ban electronic voting with proprietary software that the public can't inspect. That opens the door to fraud and cheating. What we can do and are beginning to do is make sure that all voting systems have a paper trail that can be verified by public inspection or watching the public, election officials looking over their shoulder. And that is the way to detect fraud. And, this is a civic ritual. In Canada, for a long time, each precinct, everybody watch them count the vote, and they'd phone it in. They'd have the vote by the end of the night. You don't need all these computers for that. In New England, they still do that in a lot of town meetings. That's where local government can be. The polls close, and the public can watch the representatives of each party count the ballots. They're on paper. That's how you avoid what a lot of people fear has happened in some of these elections.
Thank you, Howie. Joe Jorgensen.
Well, I can say I'm not a computer expert. However, the question is still scary to me because, once again, we're going to the president to try to fix something that should be fixed at a state and local level. If we have somebody at the White House telling all of the different counties and states how they should run their voting, then that can be scary as well. We can have movement between states where people can fix their problems. But I still go back, my answer to this question is still the answer to the previous question, which is we need to get the power back to the people. We shouldn't have our rights up for a vote. If you look at what is the definition of democracy? 2 wolves and a sheep voting on what's for breakfast. And that's what we've got now. We've got people who are going to the voting booth and voting away other people's rights. We need to have the government small enough that you wouldn't care if your vote were fraudulently changed because government would have so little power that it wouldn't make a difference. So if I've got a minute left, can I save it for another question?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
JOJ2020.com, LP.org. Small government is beautiful.
Vermin Supreme.
Yes, I like paper trail, and I think blockchain is pretty cool too. I am also for reinstating the right to vote for felons, and I would certainly very much love to give 16-year-olds the right to vote, because then I will be president. Vermin Supreme 2020.com, lp.org/platform. Thank you.
Mark Charles.
I think we have a challenge at many levels. First, we have a binary 2-party system that is not about solving problems, but blaming the other party for it. And so there's really no trust built into that system. So what most of us doing on this stage is going to help solve this problem, which is introducing a third party or an independent party into the mix, because that will create more transparency, it will remove the binary part of all of it, and it will actually give a little more accountability. So I think just the fact that we have third-party independent people who are running, having that separate voice as a part of the government will begin to address some of that. We also need to address just integrity and transparency within the office of the president. Are we able to be honest with the people that we're serving and not try to hide things or not try to politicize things? We've seen that a lot over the last few terms in office. The other challenge, and this is a more systemic problem, is it's funny that we're worried about voter fraud when we have been perpetuating voter suppression against people of color for centuries. There's a lot of debate right now about reparations for African Americans, but no one's bringing up the fact that we've never abolished slavery. 13th Amendment reads, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime wherever the party has been duly convicted shall exist within the United States. We didn't abolish slavery, we just redefined and codified it under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system. And today we use this system to remove the civil rights primarily of people of color. Not only does the U.S. have the highest rate of incarceration of any country in the world, 1 out of every 5 prisoners are ours, but a majority of our prisoners are people of color. We incarcerate our people of color at 3 to 5 times the rate we incarcerate white people. We want to deal with voter fraud. Let's abolish slavery and start there.
Oh, well said. And it's truly special. We have third-party candidates, independents, and truly independent-minded Democrats and Republicans on this panel as well. So that is super all-inclusive, so thank you for your thoughts. Gloria La Riva.
Yes, the word fraud, I really reject that as an idea when it relates to people, because you see Trump going after or accusing people of fraud by like registering to vote when you shouldn't have, in order to disenfranchise whole groups of people, especially people of color. I think the fraud is really when you can have Trump in 2015 getting on television and getting billions of dollars of free advertising in claiming that Mexicans are rapists and thieves and killers, helping him to get elected, and now he's using that argument again. brutalizing millions of people in this country, demonizing people of color and immigrants especially, who work in the fields, who work in the hotels and the restaurants, who work in the factories, and have no rights at all because they're undocumented. And to me, that's the biggest fraud, or the fraud of a billionaire who can try to buy his way into the presidency, or the idea that a billionaire can even represent the people, the vast majority who aren't even millionaires. So I think this is we have to think of completely new way of a different system, the system in where all the wealth that the workers create is shared and owned by all. And I disagree very much with the idea that we need smaller government. Well, that's what Trump's been doing. He's wiped out the EPA and the protections to the environment. What we need is a different kind of government, a government where the people are in power, where the working class takes power instead of the capitalists and the billionaires.
Mosey Boyd.
Okay, I think the question had to do with election security. And I had the privilege of voting yesterday, and so I was able to see the printout on the voting machine and confirm everything. And we in Fort Smith, Arkansas, have a paper record, so I was able to put the paper into the system, select my various folks I was voting for, including I was blessed to be able to vote for myself yesterday for president. And then confirm that on the screen, then print the receipt, and then you can look at the receipt and see exactly who you voted for, and then insert it into the collection container. And so we do have a paper trail. I think we also need to be very careful that we have paper trails with respect to our lists of registered voters. And that is another area where there are multiple mechanisms. There's electronic, digital, cybersecurity issues, but there are also voter suppression things going on around the country in different states in different ways. So I would like to recommend a book to y'all that I have listened to on the campaign trail called The Fifth Domain, and it is co-authored by a couple of individuals with a great deal of cybersecurity experience, and it does address this issue. And I think we can all reach out to our secretaries of state and our local county election commissioners and ask them, check in with them, hold them accountable for what mechanisms they are using, and do they have a paper trail, and just follow up, be engaged, participate, and learn the best practices, and then recommend those best practices to your local team, and find out what they're doing, compare, and express your opinion, and make sure that we are all participating in holding our government accountable for fair and free elections.
Zoltan is fun.
Blockchain, blockchain, blockchain. We need a universal system of blockchain all the way across America. We will save literally hundreds of millions of dollars on voting because it'll be so simple. And for those who don't know what blockchain is, it's a ledger system that can't be cheated, it can't be manipulated. It's like a paper trail, except it's on a computer. And it's absolutely the future of where all our computers are going, whether it's marriage certificates, death certificates, real estate transactions, everything else. If we were to establish a system like that, nobody would be able to cheat. We would have a completely foolproof system. And of course, you can also have a system where as soon as you vote, all of a sudden it shoots you back an email that says you voted here, and there's still a database that you can go and check and make sure that nothing was cheated. But the thing about blockchain is it's this essentially impenetrable system that takes way too much energy and way too much time to actually try to cheat. And with so many people voting, it's basically foolproof. So if you talk to any modern technician from Silicon Valley, they're going to tell you this exact same thing. The paper trail is sort of like for the dinosaurs. It's time for the 21st century to get a new voting mechanism, and it's called blockchain.
Yeah.
1 minute rebuttal.
Oh, sure.
For those of you who don't understand what blockchain is, it really is an excellent way of protecting data. It encapsulates the data in a way that being able to get in and manipulate the data leaves a little tracer so that you can't manipulate the data. The problem is it doesn't protect how the data gets in the first place, or what data gets in. And what we have to do is we have to create a system within our people that protects the data that goes in, not just the data once it's in.
Anybody else like to elaborate? Okay. One of our we do annual electoral reform symposiums. We're having our 8th annual this November in Colorado. And in fact, our production team here helps us out with that as well as the United We Stand tour. And what I learned from the comptroller and assistant secretary of state is that the voting machines are owned by Dominion, Diebold, and you follow the money and it's all tied to the powers that be. So that's, there have a lot of room for improvement when it comes to voting machines. So it was interesting coming from elected officials addressing this concern. I learned from them. So we'll go to question number 3, Adam Kokesh. We'll start off with you. In our nation's history, we've attempted to outlaw natural substances with various degrees of success. Do you believe we should continue on such a path or open up with less restrictive policy? What's your most innovative policy proposal you have that you would like to see pushed through Congress?
Well, I wouldn't like to see anything pushed through Congress. I'd like to see Congress stripped of all its power. How about that for starters, right? No, when we talk about the issue, I assume you're referring to the drug war here in terms of substances. It really comes down to a very simple libertarian principle. You own yourself, and nobody but you has a right to decide what you put in your own body. Yeah, for self-ownership, right? Yeah, hey, everybody wants to own themselves, right? This is really fundamental to freedom. And we believe, I think as libertarians, people who believe in freedom, that everybody's a libertarian, they just don't know it yet. Because you have an independent will, you have an independent body, you have a freedom of choice, and you want that freedom of choice respected. And what this comes down to with the drug war and understanding that government is force, government is violence, is that if there's no victim, there is no crime. And if anything, I think this is one thing we should really be developing a consensus on. I think among third-party and independent candidates, you generally see a pretty comfortable consensus that we acknowledge that the drug war is a racket. This is one way that government just acts like it owns us rather than serves us. Putting people in jail for victimless crimes is criminal. The drug war itself is a war crime, and it needs to end as soon as possible.
Howie Hawkins.
Yeah, drug abuse is a medical problem, not a criminal problem. So we need to legalize, tax, and regulate marijuana. And the other drugs should be decriminalized. You should not get a criminal penalty or charge for use and possession. I like the model in Portugal. If you have possession, you get a violation, and you sit down with a lawyer, a doctor, and a social worker, and look at your situation. Do you have an addiction problem that's interfering with the rest of your life? Is it affecting your health? And they are referred to help. That means we got gaping holes in our medical system. People cannot get treatment. We have thousands and thousands of people dying from opioid addiction, and we don't have a solution to that. And we got drug companies been pushing those drugs, and the criminals that push them, the executives, are not going to jail like a street drug dealer would. So we got, the white man's justice system, the rich white man's justice system that's not equal justice. So what we need is a medical system where everybody's covered, Medicare for all. You don't pay anything out of pocket at the point of delivery. It's paid for by a progressive public tax system. But I go further than Sanders. He wants to socialize the insurance, which leaves these predatory drug companies and providers who are trying to maximize their income feeding at the public trough of insurance. We called that in the 70s when it was the Kennedy bill, the Great Leap Sideways. What we need is a national health service like they got in Britain, where the doctors are civil servants and the hospitals and clinics are primarily public. And in the bill that was put forward by Ron Dellums and pioneered by the Medical Committee for Human Rights, which came out of the Civil Rights and Anti-War Movement, there would be locally elected boards, elected by the workers and the consumers, the public, that would make sure that health facilities were distributed equally within their districts, and that the prices were accountable and they could bargain with the providers. So you'd have a public system that is publicly administered, publicly owned, and publicly delivered.
Thank you. All right, so Joe Jorgensen.
Yes, people should have the freedom to put whatever they want into their bodies. However, when people talk about it, we usually look at it from the user side. Yes, we own our bodies. But the important thing that people forget about is the rest of society. For instance, we would have much safer streets if drugs were legal. If we look at alcohol, we don't see, for instance, two different alcohol dispensaries. We don't see CVS or whoever's selling alcohol. We don't see stores having a shootout over the best corner to sell gin. We don't hear about alcohol store owners on the playgrounds of trying to sell gin to students. Or we don't hear alcohol store owners trying to push vodka to high school students because the profit isn't there. The profit is there because it's illegal. In fact, Milton Friedman said that if cocaine hadn't been illegal, we probably would have never had crack cocaine because economically it wouldn't have been a feasible drug. There would have been no reason to do that, and it wouldn't have made sense to do that. Also, people who are otherwise law-abiding citizens end up coming in contact with the criminal element just to buy something like marijuana, which, by the way, is not the gateway drug, it's tobacco. So we need to look at what's really causing problems. Also, the opioid crisis. If people could have gone to marijuana, they wouldn't be hooked on all these opioids. And look at vaping. Now they're outlawing other flavors, in which what it's going to do is it's just going to drive it further underground where we have less safe products. And last, the drug war hurts the minorities more than it hurts whites, and so it needs to end.
Furman Supreme.
Yes, I smoke dope and I smoke grass, and if you don't like it, you can kiss my, well, you know what I'm saying. Anyway, yes, I firmly believe that we must indeed end the drug war. They have ruined the laws against the recreational and medical use of various drugs, have caused great misery in society, and have locked up many tens of hundreds of thousands of people that would otherwise be productive members of society, and I say it's time to let them go. Thank you.
Mark Charles.
I may end up using my third minute here, but we'll see. To understand this problem, we have to understand the history. Again, I said before that we've never abolished slavery. There's a great documentary called 13 that connects the 13th Amendment to mass incarceration. There's a great book by Michelle Alexander that talks about the same thing. The challenge is we don't understand the history behind the 13th Amendment. Abraham Lincoln was a blatant white supremacist. He wanted to end slavery, but he didn't give a crap about black lives. He stated over and over in the Lincoln-Douglas debates that white people were superior to black people. He didn't want them to be citizens. He didn't want them to marry. He didn't want them to be voters or jurors or judges. So his challenge is, what do you do with these people once you free them from chattel slavery, but you don't want them to be full part of society, while you put an amendment in your Constitution that keeps slavery legal in prison? Mass incarceration was the brainchild of Abraham Lincoln for what to do with black people after you freed them from chattel slavery. Abraham Lincoln gave us this tool, a tool which Ronald Reagan perfected with his war on drugs, which everyone knows was a war on race. And then Bill Clinton perfected even more with mass incarceration and the three strikes law. And so when you look at opioid addiction in our country, you will see that in the 80s and early 90s that there were more people of color dying from opioid overdoses than there were white people. The people of color were going up higher, and then the white people were going up slower, but they intersected in the late 90s, and in the early 2000s, white people began dying at a higher rate of opioid addiction than people of color were. And then in the early 2000s, their numbers shot up. This is when we stopped treating opioid addiction and drug addiction as a criminal offense, and we began developing life-saving techniques to save people's lives on the streets. we didn't learn anything. Well, we did learn something, but it took white people dying from this issue instead of black people or people of color dying from this issue. I'm going to keep going into my third minute. And so this was the challenge that we faced. And so if we have to understand the reason we have this criminal element of drug use is it's not about freedom or liberty of what you want or can put in your body. It's horrible for your body. But it's about ways to keep people of color incarcerated and outside of society. And this is the challenge we have to wrestle with. This is the challenge we have to deal with. If we have to find a way that we can actually value the lives of the black and brown bodies. Because right now, it took white people dying from opioid addiction for the government to give a crap about drug addiction and maybe possibly saving lives instead of just throwing people in jail. And so we have to address this at that level, not just at this level of this is a personal liberty or personal freedom. This is a systemic issue of white supremacy.
Yeah.
I'm definitely
Gloria,
I'm definitely for the decriminalization of the use of drugs. The legalization of marijuana is fine. But really the problem is the profits that's made from any of these phenomena. For example, it was a Sackler family that invented OxyContin and has led to the deaths with the multiple drugs that have resolved from that, opioids, and people going to heroin then because it's more affordable once they become addicted, that 400,000 people have died in the last 10 years. This is a major crisis. And to say put anything that you want in your body is really an absurdity because it means that whole communities, families, millions of people beyond those who have died and who suffer still, who have survived this up to now, their families are destroyed. And so the ones that should be in jail are the Sackler executives, that whole family that made billions of dollars and has put away much of that money in tax shelters to hide what their responsibility. Or the bankers, the executives who laundered money for so many years. Wachovia Bank laundered more than $370 billion, documented. And of course, the only fine they got was 2%. In the meantime, in the black and brown communities, in the working class communities, when there's no official employment, you will have informal employment. And this is what many youth who have no other opportunities are forced into, and they're the ones who pay the price by prison and the unnecessary deaths that take place from that. I think the drug crisis of heroin, of the heavy drugs, is a very, very serious problem, and we need billions of dollars put into the communities to heal those communities, to provide jobs for the youth, to provide real opportunity. If you look at Mexico, that's a macro example of when the NAFTA agreement was pushed on them, forcing them not to have their, one more minute, please, forcing them to not have their economy that they used to have of growing corn, of the government providing subsidies for the farmers, for example, and instead the flooding of that economy, destroying the national economy of Mexico. You see now the flood of drug production and sales, which affects both countries. The DEA was finally forced by a court order due to a FOIA of the Washington Post and a local newspaper to reveal that it knew exactly where every opioid pill was produced and who distributed it. 76 billion pills flooded towns from Ohio to New Hampshire, all across this country, creating that crisis. The DEA hid it. And finally, a new court order revealed that up until the present, it's 100 billion pills flooding our towns.
Thank you, Gloria. Mosey.
Thank you. So I think we've all hit on this, but the way I understand it is in the last 2 to 3 years, maybe 3 or 4 years, we have lost Each year, more than the total number of American service members we lost in the Vietnam War and the 2 Iraq wars combined. Each year, we're losing that number of American lives to drug overdose deaths. And the way I see this is that we need to think about it as we are fighting chemical warfare on our home turf. And Americans don't leave Americans on the battlefield no matter where we fall. And in the same way, it took us a while to learn compassion and understanding for our Vietnam veterans returning home. I think it's going to take us a while to learn compassion and understanding for our fellow Americans who are dying of drug overdose deaths. So I want to call out first to my higher power and ask that I be guided for how to answer this question. And second, I want to share that I recommend the 12-step programs, NA and AA, and the various other programs that guide people, may I have another minute, please, that guide people to a spiritual connection, because the life energy that flows through each of us comes from somewhere, and I won't seek to define it for you, but I ask you to think about it and make a connection to your higher power and to call on that source of life for help if you are struggling with an addiction. Because that source of life that is in us when we're living and gone when the body is laying in a coffin at the funeral, there is something there, and I don't know that we as humans can define it. Our vocabulary, we use different vocabulary. Maybe it's unknowable. I have my faith and my faith traditions, but I'm always interested in other people's faith and their faith traditions. What is it that causes us to choose life? What is it that causes us to choose joy? I make a conscious choice almost every day. I choose joy. I choose to be happy. I choose to be grateful. I choose to be ready and available to serve living beings. And that gives me the source of energy that I need to go on. But I don't know what it is for you, but I hope you will find it, that you will seek it, that you will ask for help. One of my friends says, when you don't know how to pray, or you don't know, you don't have faith, or you don't believe, just go to the edge of yourself and say, help, help, and thank you. So I don't know the solution. I will also share that I think, I understand that a couple hundred years ago, before the Opium War started in China, that China had for 1,000 years, had the strongest economy. And then I'm going to borrow another minute here, please. Then the Opium Wars were brought in China. Opium was brought in, the opium traders brought in, and the economy dropped in half. So 50% of what their economy had been was a result of this overwhelming influx of opium. And I think it's possibly a lesson that they've learned, and I don't know this for a fact, but it is my gut feeling. I have read, and I know this for a fact, the research shows that a lot of the fentanyl coming into this country is being shipped through the U.S. mail and brought through our borders from Chinese labs. And I would just suggest to you that that is one of the sources that is showing up in illegal narcotics and what people believe are legal prescriptions. So we need to be conscientious about that. And of course, then we have the criminal marketing of legal narcotics. And I think, again, I want to focus on, we need to change the nomenclature to talking about fighting chemical warfare on our home turf. And Americans don't leave Americans on the battlefield.
Thank you. Thank you, Mosey. Zoltan?
Sure, I'm going to tell you a personal story, just because this one is close to my heart, and it's also, I think, very interesting. 25 years ago, when I was in college, I was like every other college kid, smoking a little bit of pot and occasionally dealing a little bit of marijuana on the side just for $20, $40 here. Well, some student didn't like me and told the police, and in essentially like a narcotic squad, I was driving and 5 cars surrounded me, pulled me over, and convicted me of 2 felonies, which at 19 years old, of course, is a pretty scary thing to go through for literally $80 worth of marijuana. I have always been, even though I'm running as a Republican, against the drug war. I have always taken a hard libertarian stance on this issue. I think all drugs should be legalized. I think the Portugal method is probably the best, where if we're going to spend any money dealing with drugs, we're going to spend it on rehabilitation. But I take my idea even a step further, and for Reason Magazine, I wrote an opinion piece about this. I believe in, giving back perhaps reparations to people who have been convicted of nonviolent drug offenses through the sale or the monetization of federal land. America owns about $200 trillion worth of federal land. And if we were to use some of that money to pay back the 10, 15 million people like myself who had to spend 30 days in jail, who had to lose a Jeep Comanche, who had to, I'm going to take an extra minute, who had to go through the system, pay lawyers, all these other things. I mean, to do that to a 19-year-old, this is crazy for the American government to do it. I mean, part of the reason I'm running for president now is I'm pissed off because of this single incident that happened 25 years ago. But reparations could be an excellent idea to teach the government how not to do stupid things like this, and we have all this empty federal land. Besides that, as soon as you legalize all drugs and you let out all nonviolent offenders, drug offenders out of jail, you're going to empty half the prisons. You're going to have an enormous amount of money. What can you spend that money on? I don't know, you can spend it on, maybe you can give it back to the people. I mean, I would like a big tax rebate. I know all my libertarian friends like that. But either way, the point is that the drug wars cost us $1 trillion. It's a giant racket. I mean, it's a giant corporation. We have these private prisons that are swallowing up people like myself, an Ivy League educated person who's worked at National Geographic and all these other places. For what? So I stand very firm, even as a Republican, and this is one of the reasons I've been running for president as a Republican, to try to get into the party and say, look, it's one thing to be fiscally conservative. It's another thing to be so crazy with some of your views, including being like, let's make all drugs legal. I think we need to legalize all drugs. I think we need to take the saved money and use it on rehabilitation, maybe even reparations, and we need to take the saved money and give it back to the people.
Ken Armstrong.
How about that? Zoltan and I agree on something. See, this is what we come here for, to find out where we have common ground and work together, right? Hey, listen, nicotine, caffeine, sugar, alcohol, 4 deadly chemicals that are highly addictive, that the government knows you buy in whatever quantities you want to buy them in and stick them into your body however you want to stick them into your body, as long as they get the tax off of them. I'm not saying that we should be in favor of abusing anything. I tend to take in more sugar than I should take in, and some of you probably are having problems with some of those other chemicals. But you know what we have in common when we use those legal chemicals? We can go out and get help without any stigma of having broken the law. And the government cynically walls off certain drugs that are really, they're only harmful if you use them in public. And frankly, that's true of those other 4 as well. We don't want to use those things in a way that harms other people. But they wall those things off and create a stigma on recovery and help and treatment. We need to end this senseless war on American people.
All right, so everybody's answered the question, rebuttal, extension of time?
Yeah, 1 minute, please.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm with you there, Ken. The only reason I work out is so I can eat more donuts. So I appreciate that. Now, I'm glad that Mosey brought up the issue of military and veteran suicides. As someone who's lost fellow combat veterans to suicide, it's something that's really near and dear to my heart. And the answer is actually relatively simple. And I want to share just a quick personal story that when I got back from Iraq, and I went to the VA, I told them I was having trouble sleeping. I spent 5 minutes with a shrink, walked out of there, little brown paper bag, 5 prescriptions. 3 of them had suicide listed as a side effect. Yeah. I was really lucky. I had access to cannabis. And it's kind of disturbing here to hear Mr. Charles, as passionate you are about justice, say that they're horrible for your body. Cannabis saved my life when I got out of the Marines. I might have taken those suicide pills instead of had the freedom to decide what I put in my own body. It's really simple. privatize the VA, give it to us, the veterans. We can vote on a blockchain, give every veteran in America one ownership voting share, end the drug war, and I guarantee you won't have 22 veterans committing suicide every day in this country. It's a national embarrassment that has to end. And if you don't have a serious solution to this, you should not be taken seriously as a presidential candidate.
All right, anybody else? Extension rebuttal, okay.
I'd like to rebut
Go
on
ahead,
what
Gloria.
Adam Kokesh just said. What I think we need to do for veterans is stop all the U.S. wars, sanctions, and occupations that have destroyed other countries and created the phenomenon of hundreds of thousands of wounded soldiers who come back and need help and are not getting it. I'm not for the privatization of the Veterans Administration. The problem is there needs to be much more money. Since 1945, the U.S. government has spent $50 trillion in military spending, in wars abroad, in killing literally millions of people since World War II, and planning more wars, and demonization of countries like China and Iran, and imposing sanctions that have killed people in Venezuela and Cuba, and then blame those countries for trying to build socialism. What we need is not this ongoing sending of troops abroad to come back then again wounded, as I said before, and instead to create a society where all that money of the Pentagon is instead used here at home for jobs, housing, healthcare, for a true life of dignity for all, and for equality, and then to help heal those countries that have been destroyed by war, from Vietnam to Iraq, where I went 3 times and saw the destruction of that society by the United States.
Thank you, Gloria. Adam Kokesh.
Yeah, just it's the policy that I suggested was recommended or mentioned, I suppose, opposed here by Gloria. I just want to say how offensive it is to hear you say that you wouldn't let the veterans have control of the Veterans Administration, that you would
No,
keep
I didn't
it.
say that.
Because I said I want to privatize it and give veterans control of it. And you're saying, no, you don't want to do that. You would have the politicians and the special interests and the pharmaceutical industries in the way and the bureaucrats controlling the VA as we have it now. And I share your sentiments about the foreign policy. I was there. For me, it's not just the statistics, it's the pictures of the children born with birth defects, because when I was in Fallujah, we were using depleted uranium and white phosphorus. And to hear that you're opposed to war abroad is great, but that you want to bring the same policy of force and coercion here that's led to this epidemic of veteran suicides here at home, that you don't have the same commitment to peace and nonviolence when it comes to domestic policy, is a glaring contradiction and a disturbing one of everybody who says we want to use government to solve these problems that are better solved by people cooperating peacefully.
Thank you.
May I have another minute?
Would you like to use your
Yes,
this is your final
no,
rebuttal?
You're completely twisting what I said. I'm against privatization, which means profiteering. It always ends up being profiteering. We don't need to be profiteering off of veterans' suffering. And yes, veterans should be able to run the services that they need, but on the basis of really solving the crisis for veterans and what they've gone through. I also saw all the damage that took place in Iraq. I was there 3 times during the sanctions, during the blockade, during the genocide. And what I'm talking about is a completely different system, a socialist system where the people come first and where the profits do not drive everything in this country. The Pentagon is the greatest danger to the world, the greatest polluter in the world. And we are also facing that enormous existential crisis of the environmental destruction, thanks to capitalism. No, you were twisting my words about the veterans.
All right, it's a debate. All right, so we're moving on to question number 4. We'll start with Howie Hawkins. This is from Dan Peristani, hope I got your name right, from Delaware. He submitted this question. We sent out to all of our Free and Equal supporters and online. And his question is, what will you do to improve the quality of healthcare in the United States? Howie Hawkins.
Well, democratize it and socialize it. In other words, a socialist economic democracy in the healthcare sector. And I described it earlier. I think the way we move there is immediately go to Medicare for all, expand the Medicare system so everybody's covered, improve it so you don't have these deductibles. I'm on Medicare now, man. It's more expensive than when I was a Teamster and had that health care because it doesn't cover all the expenses. And so it's improved, it's expanded to cover everybody. That can be done very quickly. We set up Medicare for seniors in a year back in the 60s, and we didn't have computers. They did it on paper. So that can be done right away. And then over a 10-year period, we begin to bring the hospitals and clinics into public ownership and the doctors and other providers working for the public for salaries rather than for income maximization, which can be a contradiction to providing care because the more services you can run through your clinic, the more money you're going to get when you should be spending maybe more time with those patients. And we democratize it by electing these boards. There was a bill put in by Ron Dellums. It's called the Josephine Butler United States Healthcare Service, and it was carried by Barbara Lee until we got to Obamacare, and she dropped it, which is a shame because it was a much better bill than this single-payer bill that Kennedy had, and now there are new versions that are in the House and the Senate. Sanders has the one in the Senate. And so we're talking about a system that is under community control. It's a community-controlled national health service. It's doctors on salary, so their purpose is to provide health care, not run people through services. And we should also socialize the pharmaceutical industry. We have these superbugs coming, these bacteria, and the drug companies won't do that or vaccines because they're short-term. They want something for chronic conditions like, Viagra. Viagra. You know, that's their idea of a drug, so you got to keep taking it. And so they're not doing the job, so that should be under public control, democratic public control as well.
Thank you, Howie. Joe Jorgensen.
Here's the problem. People never spend other people's money as well as they spend their own. And what we've got with our healthcare system now is people spending other people's money. So to give an example, when Indiana went to more of a health savings account system, the number of people who bought generic drugs, who voluntarily chose generic drugs, went from 1 out of 10 to 9 out of 10. If you get to spend as much money as you want, the sky's the limit. There is just not enough money on the planet to pay for unlimited health care. And so somebody had mentioned the British system. What we see with socialized medicine is we see long lines and we see doctors being, sure, they get a salary, but here's the thing, they get a bonus if they don't refer people for problems. So is that what you want? Do you want a profit motive to have a doctor to keep you from getting care? Also, what we have right now is a system that really isn't insurance. Imagine if your car insurance paid for all your gas, all your oil, all your car washes. And they said, all you have to do, come to my place, you pay your little $1 deductible or $10 deductible, and then people started having car washes where, hey, we'll give you a lobster dinner while you're here getting your car washed. And why not? Because you're not the one paying for it. When I gave birth to my daughters, I went to a birthing center, and I tried to encourage my friends to do that. And they said, no, didn't you hear the women's hospital? They got these new $600 quilts. I want to go there. And you know what? And they serve all this nice food. So again, when you're spending other people's money, there is no limit. And until we get the money back into the power or back into the hands of the people spending it, these costs are never going to come down. So I would propose a Singapore-type system that Indiana's using.
Thank you, Joe. Berman Supreme. Berman.
Yes, I would form a presidential fitness commission. And we would all be much more fit because we would eat better and exercise more. And of course, I would give the Surgeon General an entire army of surgeons to oversee, and that would be really good. I think the thing to keep in mind, of course, is that I've recently read that 30% of healthcare costs are bureaucracy, their bureaucratic functions. And I think by streamlining the bureaucracies, we could definitely make it a much more efficient system. Of course, there's alternatives to a lot of things going on now. Even the pharmacies are offering various healthcare services. Urgent care services are popping up. A lot of people are being given the option of subscription services, as previously described, of people subscribing to medical care services and paying cash, and the savings speak for themselves. Thank you.
You forgot mandatory toothbrushing.
Pardon?
You forgot mandatory toothbrushing.
Oh, and of course, mandatory toothbrushing laws. Very important. Thank you.
No candidates helping out other candidates here.
I want to make sure everybody remembers all the finer points of Ermin's platform.
Oh, yes, good times.
Mark Charles.
Can you reread the question, please?
Yes, the question is on my last page here. Okay, what will you do to improve the quality of healthcare in the U.S. from Dan Perestani of Delaware?
The healthcare debate going on in our nation can tend to be dominated by Medicare for all or private health insurance, and there's discussion going back and forth on that. And I am someone who believes that healthcare should be a right, not a privilege, but I do not see a way to pay yet for Medicare for all, and I don't see the sense of that. But I don't want to get into that debate right now. One of the things I think we need to talk about more in our country is why are we so sick? And I would love to have a dialogue about what can we do to actually promote better health. I lived on the Navajo Nation for 11 years. We're a food desert. We're 26,000 square miles. I think we had 11, maybe 12 grocery stores, 120,000 people. Food desert, you literally would have to drive, and our nation enacted one of the first in the country junk food tax, flat, not just a soda tax, but just a junk food tax, in order for our nation to begin to raise the money to help improve access to healthy foods. So my kids have gone to public schools, and I see the foods that they are served at public schools. And there's so many things that are affected of our health just through our diet and through exercise and through the sedentary lifestyles that we live. So I would love to see, not that the government's going to enact these things, but what can we do to encourage better health within our communities? There's a whole nother dialogue we need to have on what do we need to do to deal with the psychological health of our nation. There's a lot of research into what's called historical trauma and the victims of these horrible oppressive events, but there's also what do we do as a nation that has enacted horrible things on people, and how has that affected us psychologically. So I think we have to have a conversation not just about how do we pay for health care, but how do we actually live healthier lives as a nation, and what can the government do to help that?
Thank you. Gloria?
I agree very much with what Mark said about having healthier lives. And I think that the healthcare system should be completely socialized, not a penny that one has to pay to go see a doctor or for any medical procedure, to make sure that preventive care is a priority so that people get the care that they need before they become so sick that they're in the emergency room, as many poor people have now. People who never go to a dentist because that's a luxury now. The other is a broader concept of healthcare. There has to be the ability to go for psychiatric care without this limit that many insurance companies provide now, like 20 visits max, and abolish, of course, the health insurance companies. Nationalize all the pharmaceuticals. They make huge profits, but they also get subsidized by the government for their research. And then they don't engage in research for those so-called, those diseases that are very, very rare, and that they charge $1 million for treatment, like for something like Duchenne's muscular dystrophy that affects mostly boys. Part of healthcare should be the right of women to free legal abortion on demand. We just had a rally about that today, and our rights are being threatened by the courts and by the right wing. And the idea of health, the historic trauma that Mark was talking about, and the genocide against Native peoples, and the effects of that to this very day, the isolation, the theft of the lands, and the lack of real economic well-being by the theft of that land, and living on reservations where more and more of that land, as soon as it's found to have gold or uranium, is taken away. Banning advertisements, which jams down like our throats, like you have to eat all you can eat and everything like that. And also the idea of, can I have one more minute? Do I have
used all of the
I have
rebuttals,
used them
so
all, okay.
happened.
Plastics and cancer-causing factories in Louisiana, for example, against black people.
Thank you, Gloria. Mosey.
So I'm a realist about what we're going to be able to get through the United States Senate right now, so I will echo what some of my colleagues have shared about what we can do as individuals with personal responsibility for our own health. All the research shows that natural foods and fruits and vegetables and lean, salmon, chicken, lean meats, those are kinds of unprocessed foods. We can do a whole lot to improve our physical health as well as our emotional well-being, directly related to the foods that we eat, so I encourage you to do more research on that. There's also 2 wonderful books that I would like to recommend. One is The Deepest Well, Healing the Long-Term Effects of Childhood Adversity by the current California State Surgeon General, Dr. I want to say Nadine Harris. And then the second one is The Body Keeps the Score. And it's, I'm not going to be able to remember how to pronounce the gentleman's name. He's a medical doctor. And it talks about his progression from understanding medical school strategies for mental wellness having to do with medications and all that. And he evolves through to much more effective strategies, talk therapy, yoga, a whole variety of veterans dealing with their PTSD through acting classes and improv. It's a wonderful book talking about a wide spectrum of solutions that are very effective for improving mental wellness. Again, The Deepest Well, and then The Body Keeps the Score. You can get them on Audible or in print or CD. They're both wonderful.
Thank you. Sultan.
To begin with, I believe in a universal basic income, a tax-free universal basic income that would be implemented through monetizing the $200 trillion worth of federal land that we have sort of taken hostage. The government's taken hostage from the people. So if we were to monetize that and pay for a universal basic income, everybody would then be able to afford private insurance. Beyond that, though, as a transhumanist, somebody who wants to use radical science and technology with the human body, I really don't believe in the Band-Aid system that a huge amount of the pharmaceutical companies are doing right now, and hospitals and whatnot. They basically try to keep you kind of sort of sick and make a lot of profit. I believe in replacing things. We have a number of companies now in Silicon Valley doing bionic kidneys, 3D printing out livers. They're using bionic hearts. The number 1 killer in the world is heart disease. 25% of us are going to die from it. There are companies out there working on artificial hearts that will probably within the next 5-10 years electively be able to replace our own heart and be better. That's a real long-term solution to the problem of healthcare, is eliminating disease, eliminating aging, eliminating bad organs or organs that fail. That's exactly what a huge amount, literally hundreds of billions and maybe even more than that, of money is going into Silicon Valley with all these different startups. They're trying to make your health perfect. They're not saying, eat better lunches, this and that. Honestly, a lot of that hasn't really worked. What they're going to do is make you perfectly healthy. And the last thing I want to say about our healthcare system is I am married to a physician, and the number 1 problem with the healthcare system, and forgive me for upsetting people, but it's lawyers, lawyers, lawyers. They have been inundating our entire system and making it so bureaucratic that the costs of everything have gone up, whether it's class action lawsuits or whether it's just a nitty-picky about little things that happen and how these things, they've made healthcare costs just exorbitant. We can't afford it. If we were to take out have major tort reform and take out the lawyers out of the medical system, and every doctor I know tells me this, then we would be in a much cheaper state where we could all afford it.
All right, Ken.
There's a frightening tendency in political philosophy these days to solve problems without looking at what caused the problem in the first place. And if we're going to solve the problem of our out-of-control healthcare costs in the country, we have to rewind to when they weren't out of control and say, what did we do there that caused the ball to go off the table? About 60 years ago, the government started controlling healthcare in a huge way. It started in the latter part of the Kennedy administration through Johnson with the Great Society and Medicare, and then into the Nixon administration with wage and price controls. And all of these things collaborated to bring up the costs of healthcare. Before that time, we were still incredibly progressive in innovations. Heart transplants and all kinds of things were invented, were developed before that time. Polio was wiped out before that time. But the increase in cost is owed directly to government control and backing off the government control of the industry and allowing a free market to decide what you want to buy and for how much is the best way to bring a price down.
Thank you. Adam.
Well, as someone who gets his health care through the Department of Veterans Affairs, I'm a big fan of preventative care and staying fit so that I don't have to go in any more than absolutely necessary. And when you hear Medicare for all, what you should be hearing is VA for all. If you want a suicide epidemic in the general population like we have among veterans, yeah, let's get government more involved with healthcare. Healthcare is the most important thing to keep government out of. Government is force. Government is violence. Of all the places that you would want to inject that, why, of all places, in this most important part of society? And I think Joe did a wonderful job of explaining how destructive it is when you have a system set up where you're spending other people's money, because you will never shop around, you will never be as careful with it, and what that leads to is the fraud, waste, and abuse that we have today. So how do we transition to a nonviolent system without pulling the rug out from underneath anyone? Localization. Get healthcare down to the community level. A community is something that is voluntary, that you choose to be a part of, that you're not forced into. And we can have virtual communities of people who pool resources to create their own systems of insurance or community care, whatever they want. But when you introduce violence, when you introduce the coercion of government, you introduce huge amounts of inefficiency. And when it comes to healthcare spending, the money that we're putting into this, the resources that we have available as a society to invest in healthcare, every inefficiency means one less procedure, one less prescription, one less life-saving surgery. And that is why I want to see government entirely out of healthcare. I want to see nonviolence and cooperation here where it is most important.
Thank you. Howie, for one of your rebuttals.
Yeah, the problem with the VA or the British Health Service is that they're not democratic. We should bring it to the community level, local elected boards. If we had local elected boards and they were, as somebody said, saying we're going to give you a bonus if you don't refer somebody to a specialist, we would stop that. We don't want our doctors doing that to us. So the problem with these state programs that are not democratic, that's not socialism, that's just statism. And often they're captured by private industry, so they end up being a source of money for profiteers. So democracy is key. And let's be clear, this privatized system we got kills tens of thousands a year. Man that lived downstairs from me last year was on Medicaid, but he's worried about paying his rent and utilities. He couldn't get the kidney medicine he needed. It wasn't that expensive. His kidneys failed. 60-year-old man, he died. That's replicated tens of thousands of times every year. The privatized healthcare system shows how wasteful and duplicative and inefficient capitalist healthcare is, and I'm out of time. So I got 1 more minute.
You can use your last rebuttal if you would like, Howie.
Yeah, I think I'll do that.
Go for it.
So we got a system, we got thousands of healthcare plans, and somebody mentioned the bureaucracy. Healthcare should not be a buy or die commodity. Should be a right. Should be a public service. You get it like you get a public education. And I think another thing needs to be said. I wish Sanders would say this, or Warren in the debates to Biden and them talk about the public option. The public option costs more, keeps the bureaucracy in place. It costs more. Somebody said we can't afford Medicare for all. I think we can't afford not to have it because it's so damn inefficient the way we're doing healthcare now. We pay twice as much as any other country for worse healthcare. Disease costs more. People talk about prevention. If you have access to healthcare, you're going to get the prevention you need. So we can't afford not to have a fully socialized, community-controlled public health system.
Joe.
Yes, I'd like to use my first extra minute, please.
Please.
So I do agree that we need to lead healthier lives. And let's look at how we got down the path to obesity. One of them was the government subsidies to corn farmers. So what we had was the invention of high fructose corn syrup. It made sugar very cheap because the government was paying for part of it. So we've got the government putting money into something making us less healthy. Also, you look at the 4 food groups, which the government first put out, and then the pyramid and all those other schemes. Why was one whole quarter dairy? It's because of the dairy farmers putting money into the government. So I don't understand why socialists want a socialist system in which we've got a government controlled by these special interests. Do you think all of a sudden these special interests will just go away and they're not going to give money to the government? And you mentioned that you don't want to pay doctors' bonuses. Well, how are you going to keep health care costs down then? Let me use my other minute.
Sure.
We do not have a capitalist system. The government took the capitalism out of it after World War II. They had wage and price controls, and so when companies wanted to hire the best workers, they couldn't give them raises, they couldn't offer higher salaries. So what they did was they gave them health care, and it was tax deductible. So how is the average person on the street supposed to be able to pay for a health care health insurance, when they're competing against these large corporations offering it to their companies? People don't go to their company for car insurance. They shouldn't have to go for health insurance. We are the only country in this world that has that. Last, the only true capitalist system we have in this country, LASIK surgery, cosmetic surgery. Those prices have plummeted with higher quality. Why? Because people are spending their own money, and for once the doctors have to compete. That's right, they compete for profit, and the way they compete for profit is by offering better prices and better quality.
Thank you. All right, we're moving on to question 5. We'll probably have at least 7 questions for this debate, and then we'll have the closing statement. I wanted to remind our online viewers, everybody in our audience, that we have our approval voting poll. So if there's a candidate here or several candidates that you are like, yeah, I'd vote for them, go on our website, freeandequal.org, and you can vote through approval voting who's your favorite candidate at the end of this debate. And so just wanted to let everybody know that that's there on our website now, and our mobile now as well. So, okay, so 5th question, Joe Jorgensen, you will start off with this question. The question is, the pharmaceutical industry is supporting mandatory vaccinations for children in various states, and it is said forced vaccinations for adults is also part of their long-term strategy. Do you support these programs? If so, why or why not? And this is from one of our supporters online, a big supporter for Free and Equal, Ty Loomis from Laguna Beach, California.
Yes, absolutely not. You know, it's one thing when government puts out mandates, or, you know, it's one thing when government says, okay, you can't use drugs, you can't be in the sex trade, and you can't do some, gamble. That's bad enough. What's even worse is now the government coming in and saying you have to put this in your body. That is so much more egregious. And by the way, it wouldn't surprise me that the pharmaceutical companies are the ones behind it, because once again, we've got special interests getting in, spending money on politicians. Politicians get bought, and then the rest of us lose.
Thank you. Berman?
Simply put, I believe it's a medical decision to be made between an individual and their medical professional. Thank you. I'm Vermin Supreme, 2020.com.
Mark?
This is a very loaded question. The mandated vaccines is a loaded question because it's putting the government in charge of doing something to your body. And as a Native American, I can attest to the fact that the government definitely cannot usually be trusted in these sorts of issues. And so there is a very real skepticism by a lot of Americans about this. The other challenge, though, that we face is that Western civilization is hyper-individualistic. And the world is no longer an individual place. We are a global community, and what I do in my home, what you do in your home, absolutely affects what happens in our neighborhoods and in our cities and in our countries. The coronavirus is a great example of this. You know, it started in China, and the first outbreak here in the U.S. was in Washington, and it happened before they knew that there was really a more mild version of the coronavirus, and so there were many people who they realized they weren't catching them, they weren't identifying them as having the virus when actually they were just having very mild symptoms, and so this kind of percolated within some of these retirement homes in Washington, and a lot of people got sick before we even knew it was there. And this is the challenge with vaccinations. In an individual world where you live on an island, yes, you should be able to choose, do you or do you not get vaccinated? You don't live in an island. You live in a global community where we travel, we fly, we interact with one another on a global scale. And one or two people not vaccinated can have huge ramifications in the health of the entire community. So we have to remember that the hyper-individualism of Western society is actually incredibly dangerous to the health of the global community.
Gloria?
I believe that vaccination is very important for a society, and the idea of collective responsibility for each other is utmost. We've had a problem in the last few years of this fake news that promotes through the internet these myths about vaccination, creating all kinds of health problems that in fact are not true. But it gets pushed out there so much that people start to fear, and it develops a phenomenon of its own. And therefore, people pay the price. When the polio epidemic was taking place, the scientific explanation of the vaccines that were created and the testing and the success of it made the population, the people of the U.S., understand that it was necessary. But now you find these phenomena of the media promulgating the idea that vaccinations are a problem. And it's the children who pay the price mainly. We have right now in the United States a very, very serious crisis developing from the lack of any kind of health plan, of people who can't even go to a doctor to get tested in case they might be exposed to the COVID-19 bacteria. And we're seeing now that people don't have the right to even sick pay or vacation pay, who are going to suffer economically and will help spread a disease that looks like it could really, really become an epidemic in the United States. And while China is being criticized, China has dealt with it efficiently and in the right way, medically.
Rosie?
I want to take this opportunity to address the coronavirus. I believe that is a classic national security catch-22, where we have the health risks, but then we have the economic risks and all of the concurrent problems that come from panicking. I think that we need to be very conscientious about following the CDC guidelines, about washing our hands regularly, staying abreast of the recommendations. This is something that we need to be very vigilant and conscientious about collectively in our families and our communities, but also we need to be careful about managing to go about our regular business, to grow our economy, and to make sure that we are balancing those two interests. So I want to commend all of the medical scientists who are working very hard on this issue, and everybody at every level who's taking precautions and being responsible. I think this is something that I hope that we can limit the effects of.
Thank you. Zoltan.
Oh, this topic is so tough. Look, first off, if you don't get your vaccines and give them to your children, you're doing an incredibly immoral service, not only to the public, but to your kids. I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and it's like, I can't even imagine being an anti-vaxxer. Like, haven't you seen what's happening with the world population? You know why it's going up? Because people have created vaccines. So we don't die from things that used to kill us. And that's the whole thing here with this, is we need to use these things to make us live longer and to live better. But ultimately, despite all that, I can't side behind a government that would force you to take a vaccine. I just can't, because my love of freedom comes about that. However, I think there could be rules that say if you haven't been vaccinated, you can't attend a public school and other things like that. But I don't think that the government should come into your house and be able to stick a needle into you. However, let's just not be the boogeyman conspiracy theorists all the time. Vaccines save lives. And they've been doing that for decades now. There's ample proof out there. Give them to your kids, give them to the people you love. The government's not always the bad person.
Ken.
I'm sorry, I'm biased on this one. When my nephew Jason was 3 months and 4 days old, he went in for his well baby checkup, and the doctor said he was in perfect condition. Perfect 3-month-old little boy, and gave him his vaccinations and sent him home, and 12 hours later he was dead. I'm afraid that there is no medical proof one way or the other whether vaccines work, but I know one thing: the government has taken the extraordinary position of passing a law to indemnify the companies that produce the vaccines so that you can't sue them for what's in their product. If it's so safe, why does the government have to protect the industry against lawsuits? I'm sorry, if your child is vaccinated and that vaccine is as good as you believe it is, then you shouldn't be worried about the kid sitting next to your kid who hasn't been vaccinated. This is a matter of free choice. There is still a great deal of information to be gathered. It is not settled science, and I call BS.
Adam.
Well, if you made it through February of 2020, you've survived World War III threats, climate change, bushfires. You've survived volcanic eruptions, Yummy by Justin Bieber, and a global virus pandemic outbreak. Is anybody else a little put off by the fear-mongering in the media around this? Be afraid, be very... I'm thinking of that scene from V for Vendetta where the minister guy goes, "Make them remember why they need us." And it's all about scaring you into giving up your rights. This isn't a complicated issue. No one has a right to force something into your body. You have the right to vaccinate. You have the right to disassociate. If you don't want to be around people who aren't vaccinated, you shouldn't be forced to be around them. If you want to be unvaccinated, you have that absolute right to your body. And what we have now, when we have given up that right to government, if we cede that fundamental right at all, like Ken said, we take away the accountability. for the people who are making vaccines. I'm not a doctor. I don't pretend to know the effectiveness or what the exact right balance is, but I know the difference between right and wrong. And I know when you allow government to mandate vaccinations, you have all the problems that we have today, as Ken pointed out with his tragic story. The question is, do you trust the government to make these decisions for you? Do you trust them if you give up that right to the sanctity of your body to do the right thing? Do you trust that they won't be corrupted? I do not. Now, I just want to take my last few seconds to ask Howie here a question. With the VA, Medicare, Medicaid, and every other intrusion into the healthcare industry in this country, how can you say that we have a privatized system? And if what you want is localized control, as you explained, I would challenge you, would you agree then to get the federal government entirely out of health policy and allow states to determine their policy for themselves?
I need another minute.
All right, so you're done, Adam? Yeah, I know. Howie has no rebuttals. What are you doing, Adam?
Gaming the system. It's great. He can't rebut, right? He can take an extra
Well,
minute.
he can.
Mark used up all of his too, so.
He can respond to this question and use your time wisely, Howie.
We need a bottom-up federation, local control coordinated at the state and federal level. And I'd love to talk about that, but let me deal with the vaccination question, because that was what was asked. Look, I get my vaccinations. I agree it should be an issue between your medical professional and yourself. I think it's wrong for the government to say you have to get it, because this is a matter for some people of religious freedom, which is really freedom of thought, which is the most important thing. If you have the state say you can't say or think certain things, then you got a real problem, because sometimes the skeptics are right. And even though I think there's a lot of fake news out there about vaccinations, the discussion should not be stopped by the government. We have a situation in New York where these liberals like de Blasio and Cuomo demonize the Orthodox Jews who won't get their vaccinations. They do have a measles problem, but we've had anti-Semitic attacks, violent attacks on Orthodox Jews, many attacks recently in New York. And I believe this demonization of the Orthodox Jewish community for not getting their vaccinations is part of that. That's the problem when the government says you can't think certain things, you can't say certain things. I think education is key, like smoking reduction, that worked. And the biggest problem with people not being vaccinated is not those who refuse to get vaccinations, it's those who are not able to get access to the healthcare system. We have 28 million people uninsured in this country. We have 41 million underinsured, which means they're afraid to even go because they're not covered enough and it'll cost them too much. That's a third of the adult population. You want to reduce the number of people not vaccinated? Get a Medicare for all system. And I'm out of time where I go on to your question.
You still have 30 seconds, 15 seconds. You can answer it.
Well, I talked about
Answer it.
Yeah, I talked about the federation, and it would be collective community, not those people in or out in a privatized situation. So it would be a public resource, but we all have control over it democratically.
So it'd still be centrally controlled.
At the local level, you want to call that centrally?
Well, you
Okay.
see, you have a federal system overseeing that.
All right. So we'll have a discussion after the debate. All right, you guys. All right, so moving, any more rebuttals, extensions?
How many extra minutes do we get total?
You get 3 rebuttals each total.
Okay.
So you have one left, Joe. Your what?
I used mine up.
Yeah.
You used all of yours. Yeah, you did too. So did Mark. In the same club there.
It was worth it, though.
All right. So question number 6, we're going to start with Vermin on this. Do you think every American should have a pony? Okay, no, I wouldn't do that to everybody. Retract. I would not do that to everybody.
That wasn't really the question.
No, but...
That would have been a really good question, though.
All right, so I really... we work with a lot of different social media platforms, sponsors of ours, media sponsors like Collective Evolution and Free Thought Project, Anti-Media, and The Mind Unleashed, and there's so many more. They have been censored. So I want to really just dive into, do you think internet censorship is just that is or valuable in any way? Please explain your views and your plans, if any, to end or expand censorship. So I'd like to hear your viewpoints on what's going on with the internet and censorship and media, so on. Blackout.
Wow. Well, as a meme, I do know if I do not get constant internet coverage, then I cease to exist. So that's very unfortunate. Naturally, these private entities and private organizations certainly do have a right to their editorial control and editorial content and allowing what sort of information that they want on it. Also, it's very unfortunate when they do deny people the opportunity to utilize their free speech. But of course, the free speech in the First Amendment is specifically targeted at the government. And of course, there are also arguments that some of these platforms were developed with government money and essentially have taken the place of the public square. And so therefore, they might be held to different accountability in terms of allowing people access to their platforms. So I believe information is powerful, information should be shared, information should be free, and let it flow. Thank you.
Thank you.
VerminSupreme2020.com.
Mark, you follow that every time, right? Cute.
I was at UCLA when Al Gore came on campus to invent the internet. And
Wow.
the internet is an incredibly powerful tool. My children are Gen Z. They don't know the world without high-speed internet. And they all have a level of expertise in something that they learn not from school but from the internet. I don't care if it's making slime or building drones. They've all gained a high level of expertise in something from watching a YouTube video on the internet. And these children, our children are bored out of their minds in school because we have a Encyclopedia Britannica educational system where we are educating our kids in this world where we grew up in, where you had a research paper and you had to go run across town to borrow your neighbor's Encyclopedia Britannica, and that's all you had to do to research. That's all that was the limit of your research. They now have this information and more in the tips of their fingers, and yet we're asking them to memorize something that they can voice search without even thinking about it. And so our children are bored out of their minds, and we're afraid to change the internet. We're afraid to change the educational system because of the plethora of information. But the people who are sending out fake news and who are responding to scams aren't children, it's the older generations. The kids understand that. They've fact-checked all these things years ago. And so I think that the most important thing for our children to go beyond where we have gone and to stand on our shoulders and really do something incredible is if we have an open and free internet. And they're able to use it for the research and to learn and to understand things, not memorize rote information and regurgitate it to us, but learn new things through learning things on the internet and going above and beyond what we've ever expected them to do. They're already doing it with their slime, they're doing it with their AI, and they can do it with so much more. And I think we just have to empower them to do that.
Thank you, Mark. Gloria?
I think the internet is one part of the question of information and the right to information, and we see it being controlled by not just a government, but a capitalist government. I think that there's something to be really discussed here about what kind of a government we're talking about. But you have now Facebook and Twitter blockading tweets and Twitter accounts from Venezuela and Cuba or from anti-war groups. They're deciding what will be allowed on the internet, and it's a very powerful weapon being used against us. I think that, yes, the new generation, that's all they know. We have so many television channels, so much access, unlimited access to the internet, and more ignorance about the world than any other people. And I think there's a problem with that. And I think what we need to do is keep organizing an independent movement of people to set our priorities about saying that, no, we don't agree that the people of the world are the enemy and that we need another war against them, or to believe what gets put out in the media. Because the media uses the internet as well, the New York Times, the Washington Post, that has been demonizing other countries, like now, just yesterday, accusing Iran falsely of building, of having the potential to build nuclear weapons. That's a lie, and yet it's preparation for a new war. This demonization of the last year against Venezuela being promulgated in the media. These are the bigger questions, I think, about information. And what we need is the people's truth, and against prophets.
Mosey.
So the internet is obviously a wonderful tool that helps all of us in many things throughout most of our days. It also has potential to be terribly dangerous in a whole lot of ways. And I just want to tell you a story that probably we'll all recognize, or many of us may. So about a decade or so ago, I started noticing that in Walmart, you would go and you could buy clothing, and there was a very common label called Faded Glory, and it was turning up everywhere. And personally, I didn't want to buy it. It just seemed like it was a propagandistic sort of psychological operations type thing. And the more I started paying attention to it, my mom would, buy something, I'd borrow something when I was visiting. And there's more and more of this label all over the country in all these Walmarts. And as I traveled around the country, I've noticed more and more. And that's effectively, we are paying to leaflet our own country with a negative message that has a damaging psychological effect. And I take that as an example of a brilliant, masterful effort that we paid another country to leaflet, and I believe they were all made in China. So I think we need to pay attention as we are interacting with the internet. There are many, many different forms of psychological operations, psychological warfare that we are interacting with from many different sources. And I won't go into so many details because we don't have a lot of time, but I just caution us to pay attention, especially little children. There are many, many applications.
Thank you, Mosey. Zoltan.
Sure. Well, first, let me say that I think Gloria said that the New York Times said something about Iran that was a lie. Being someone who works there, that's totally untrue. I can tell you that if you deliberately make a factual error, you will almost certainly be fired, and you certainly have to publicly apologize. So that's just not what happens at a publication like that. They do make mistakes, but believe me, they go through everything very carefully. But look, the internet might be looked at like we look at smoking these days. We're going to look back in 10 years and be like, wow, we didn't treat it the right way. That said, even if the internet is this crazy place, and I have children, and I know it's crazy, I still don't think we should be trying to monitor it or regulate it. It's done a lot of great things in society. It's the Arab Springs. I mean, it's freed a lot of people. It's democracy at its core. And if we believe in democracy, then we want to let the internet be free. And companies like Facebook and Google, and I don't always like them, believe me, especially not Facebook, they still have the right to do what they want as long as they're private companies. If they become public utilities, if that is somehow decided, then that's a very different ballgame. But right now, I mean, if you don't like Facebook, just don't use it. If you don't like an internet service, just don't use it. If you want to come up with a new service, go to your own site and do it the way you like. But don't try to tell people, especially companies, how to run their businesses. And believe me, I agree. A lot of the fake news is awful from a journalistic point of view, and it's just awful because it's bending people's minds, and it's bending it often the wrong way. But the wrong thing to do is to regulate it. The right thing to do is to try to come up with new programs that might be scalable or viable and actually help the problem. And that's how capitalism would tackle that problem.
Ken.
If you want to get an idea what kind of mentality the government has about information, I encourage you to Google the Afghanistan papers and read them. It's a chronicle of 20 years, 5 presidents, including the sitting president, lying to you and it's not, this isn't voodoo stuff. This is carefully chronicled proof that your government has been manipulating what you hear and what you know about how it has been prosecuting the wars and the fact that it's been losing the war in Afghanistan and knew it. Now, I tell you this because the government has been in the business of manipulating what you think and what you know for your entire life. And the last thing we want to do is give the government more control over what kind of information gets to you. So we as citizens need to take the burden on ourselves to raise our children in a way that they become critical thinkers, that they become capable of understanding that there are some things that are healthy for them and some things that aren't healthy for them, and to raise them. Use filters if you need to on your computers, if you need to avoid certain kinds of material, whether it's political or sexual or whatever. If it bothers you, filter it out. But for goodness sake, don't give the government the power over your mind.
Adam.
I believe in freedom of speech, freedom of press, and freedom of data. And government should have absolutely nothing to do with regulating, impeding, or violating the free flow of information whatsoever. It is absolutely criminal when you are talking about peaceful interactions that are based on exchanging communications. That's what we're talking about here. And we think, again, we get scared into going for censorship, even on a private platform like Facebook, where they censor racism, they censor violence, they censor animal abuse. Well, what they're doing is sweeping it under the rug. The internet is an incredible tool for transparency, bringing these things to the forefront. If your neighbor is doing something creepy and they post about it on Facebook, do you want it censored or do you want to be able to see it? I want to be able to see it so we can address those issues. Now, obviously, there are plenty of other problems with Facebook and censorship and shadow banning and manipulation through corporations under corporatist policy that are essentially extensions of the corporate duopoly. They want to control any dissident messages. I think a lot of people on this stage have experienced it. I've experienced it myself. I've been said I have arguably the most shadow banned channel on YouTube. But if we really want to solve all of the problems of polarization and dispute in the United States, there's one really simple solution. Get off Facebook. Oh, I'm sorry. You guys wanted a realistic solution. My bad. Okay. So how do we come to something that is realistic, that we can unite everyone on, that is practical, that brings people together instead of having us fight over even a simple question like this? Again, localization, a moderate, practical, unifying policy. Thank you.
Howie.
Yeah, I'm totally opposed to government censorship of private citizens. But we got a problem, and the problem is the government. We need to, I think, censor the government. If you saw that Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists explanation as to why they moved the doomsday clock to 100 seconds to midnight, it says climate change, nuclear weapons, and information warfare. Because all these states are putting out propaganda, disinformation, fake news, and confusing the hell out of us and the government so we can't even get our heads together to come up with solutions. So we got to stop the governments from doing that. We should have a cyber war treaty with Russia. They offered one to Bush, they offered one to Obama, and I think our government said, no, we're ahead of you, we're going to kick your butt, and we don't want a treaty. And it maybe came back to bite them in 2016 and maybe biting our butts right now. So that's a big issue. Now, I agree with Gloria. We got to free the political prisoners and the whistleblowers. Peltier, Mumia, all those whistleblowers, and especially Assange, especially Ed Snowden. You got to read his book, Permanent Record. Great memoir. It reads like a spy novel. He's also got good policies for how to deal with this question because the internet is the surveillance eyes of the security state and also the corporations. So like one thing Snowden says is, your information is your property, not the government's or these corporations, because they're collecting it. They got a law like that in Europe. If I was president, I'd bring Snowden in the administration to help us deal with these issues because he's very committed to democracy and against authoritarianism. Last thing I'll say is that these platform networks like Facebook are natural monopolies. Everybody want to be on Facebook because everybody on Facebook. And that's the way these things tend to do. Amazon, Google, maybe instead of being private companies, they should be public utilities that are under community control rather than their private tyrannies under the control of their capitalist bosses. I think that's an area we need to look at. So the internet is really open and accessible to everybody and not controlled by the Zuckerbergs and whatever their names are, the Amazon, Bezos, and people like that.
Thank you.
Yes, so I'm against all censorship of the internet. In fact, I'm against all censorship, basically. I saw an article in the newspaper. This was decades ago, back when we used to read the newspaper instead of the internet. And I was just surprised that people didn't see the irony here. It showed 3 or 4 white men, of course, hunched around reading, looking at pornography, trying to decide if this is something that the rest of the community should read. And the inherent thing with any kind of censorship, including pornography, is you have to have somebody read it and look at it to decide if other people should read it or see it. So we're back to Animal Farm all over again. Why should we have a few people in powerful government rule the rest of our lives? And I was, for a school assignment not that long ago, I've gone back to get a couple extra degrees. I believe it was an article by George Lakoff, but I could be wrong. He compared the Democrats and Republicans to your mother and your father. And he said the Republicans were like your father who uses punishment. And the Democrats were like your mother who used rewards and they were nurturing. And wouldn't you much rather have the government be like your nurturing mother? And when the teacher asked us that, my answer was, hey, you know what? I'm an adult. I don't need a parent. We're past that stage. So once again, the government tries to be the nanny government and tell us all what we should do, how we should live our lives, what we should put in our bodies, what we should not put in our bodies, and what we should be forced to put in our bodies. And that's completely wrong. We're all adults.
Wow.
Are we taking requests? No. It's a song for Vermin.
So I was, thank you for that on internet censorship. Very important topic. One of the supporters of free and equal elections is a co-founder of SpaceX, Jim Cantrell. And what he has taught me is in shooting sats they call, into space, there is a way in one day where we will be able to have a CubeSat in space that is a decentralized social media hub beyond Facebook. And I think that's going to tie into the blockchain app, decentralized. So interesting. So yeah, it seems like internet censorship's not the way to go, and they're putting themselves out of business, right? Long term doing that. So, all right. So I've got to ask this question, just kind of going off what Howie had to say there, and Edward Snowden and Permanent Record. In fact, my dad just bought me that book, so I'm reading that. And so we're going to start with Mark Charles here. Do you believe that Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, Ross Ulbright, and Leonard Peltier have committed crimes against the United States government and deserve their sentences, or do you support their complete pardon and release from prison?
I have not researched and read all of the things that all of these men have done, or not done, or have been accused of, I should say, let me put it that way. I will acknowledge Leonard Peltier, and the ones, I know more about him than the others, are political prisoners. But I think by talking about do they get pardoned, we're again addressing the problem from the wrong angle. I would be happy to look at any of the information, and do we need to pardon it? Yes, I think we need to have that conversation. But we need to ask, pardoning isn't going to fix the system that incarcerated them in the first place. And this is the challenge, and this is where I want to go back to the 13th Amendment, which is we have a system that allows us to remove the civil rights, and it's primarily written for people of color. We have kept slavery legal in the prison system so that we can remove the rights of people of color. And while it's important that we address these individual injustices that took place, if we don't deal with the system that allowed this incarceration to happen in the first place, we're not going to fix the problem. If we just free all of the nonviolent drug offenders, we may have freed some people from jail, but we haven't fixed the system, and it won't be that much longer until there are more people in the system that are now incarcerated. And so the question that I really want to deal with is, how do we end up fixing the system? And this is where I'm saying we have to have the conversation about actually abolishing slavery. We have to take that clause out of the 13th Amendment that makes slavery legal in prison, and we have to create a system that's actually fair and removes the racism and the white supremacy that's a part of it. And so that's the question, I think. While it's important that we address these individual cases, we have to deal with the system that's causing this to happen in the first place.
Thank you. Gloria. Yeah, thank you.
I'm for the pardon of all the people you mentioned. I don't know who Brightman is.
Ross Albright.
Oh, Russ Albright. I don't know, but I'm going to say yes, pardon for all of them. Chelsea Manning was uncovering U.S. war crimes against the people abroad, and Edward Snowden did an amazingly brilliant exposure of the surveillance of every individual in this country and abroad. Leonard Peltier, if you look at my website, larivapeltier2020.org, you will read about his story. He's one of the last victims, a victim of the U.S. government and FBI's war on Native people. What he and the American Indian movement were doing was defending the land and the people of Pine Ridge who were under attack, and which the FBI, even though dozens of people had been murdered up until the time of the shootout that he was wrongly convicted of, that the FBI did nothing to solve the crimes against Native people, and that what they were doing in Pine Ridge was fighting a corrupt government and fighting for the right to their land and control over their land and sovereignty. So I wish to say that about Leonard. I really hope people read about his life and find a way to help him. You can contact us, and you can contact whoisleonardpeltier.info. If you learned about his life, you would want him free as well, and free the others too, and so many other political prisoners.
Thank you, Gloria.
When they talk about, I have
go ahead.
15 seconds.
Oh, yes.
When they talk about nonviolent crimes, freeing people, there's also a lot of people who are in prison for violent crimes who don't belong in prison either. And it takes a long explanation. There are some who belong in prison, but the whole system has to be completely abolished as we know it.
Gloria, it's quite something that Leonard is your running mate.
Yeah, and I just visited him.
Wow.
So it was
So
great.
I've watched some videos about him recently, quite a few. So,
Good.
yeah,
Thank you.
so. All right, so Mosey.
I want to take this opportunity to share about what I think is a next step of the civil rights movement. I think that we need to train young students from third, fourth, fifth grade. In Fort Smith, our mayor is the first African-American mayor in our 200-year history, and I worked very hard to help get him elected in many respects. He has something called the Golden Knights and the Jewels. It's a mentoring program that starts in fourth grade and works all the way up through high school. I think we need to help people plan a career path to go to college, go to law school, and serve in our prosecutorial teams across the country. There is something like only 14% of the prosecutors across the country are people of color. And I think it is like even far less for women of color. The numbers are dramatic. And I think when we look towards diversifying our prosecutorial teams, a lot of these differences of perspective that we may hear here and also that we may hear in the wider community the prosecutors, 95% of cases are resolved at plea, so the judge never has any impact, and it's the prosecutor's office who is making the decisions about what to offer for a plea deal. And I think as we work to diversify our prosecutorial teams across the country, that is an opportunity for young people to pursue careers and for us to change the decision-making and change the background that is brought to bear on those kind of decisions. And I hope that it will lead to better decisions across the board. That's something that we've been working on in Fort Smith with our local bar association, with actually, we haven't actually presented it to the Bar Association, but we've been planning to work with the NAACP and the Bar Association. So, thank you.
Thank you. Zoltan.
So, it's always a tough question on who you would pardon and who you wouldn't, but I think Assange, Albright, Manning, and Snowden would get my pardon, though I would have to look into every case individually. I actually don't know that much about Pelletier, and I'm glad that Gloria spoke about him. I'm going to definitely look more into it. I just think if you've been convicted of violent crimes, in this case murder, it takes a much more severe look because there are other victims to consider when you pardon somebody else. But in the case of nonviolent crimes like Julian Assange, something like this, or Snowden, I mean, I'm completely for legalizing drugs and information, just letting it go completely wherever it needs to go. So these people have never been convicted in the world that I want to live in. Thank you.
Thank you. Ken.
So the first question we ask is, did these people commit a crime? Did they break the law? And in most cases, they've admitted it. They did. They broke the law. They committed a crime. It's documented. Some of them have been convicted. But here's the question. So what? We live in a culture where we actually celebrate people who have broken the law. The Declaration of Independence was signed by people who broke the law. The people who crossed the bridge at Selma, civil disobedience, they broke the law. We celebrate people every day who go up against the unfair, unreasonable laws of this country. When the Supreme Court ruled in Plessy v. Ferguson, and all of the bad law that came out of that, people rebelled against that. And that's, I think, the only case where a Supreme Court decision has ever been overturned completely because it was bad law. We need to be aware that sometimes laws do not serve the people. And that's why I favor jury nullification, which I hope is something else we'll talk about at some point.
All right, thank you. Adam, please.
Well, I've been arrested for making a YouTube video with a firearm. I've been arrested for cursing at police officers, and I've even been arrested for dancing. Now, Zoltan, I disagree. I don't think this is a tough issue. I think this is a very simple ethical issue. If there's no victim, there is no crime. And the one thing that I will do as president before resigning to take us through this bankruptcy process is to pardon everyone I possibly can for victimless crimes. And I like your list, Christina, but I think I would add a few. Mine is Chelsea Manning, reality winner, Julian Assange, Ed Snowden, Jeremy Hammond, Schaefer Cox, Leonard Peltier, and even John McAfee. But of course, Ross Ulbricht. Can you imagine what his mother has been going through since he got arrested, sentenced to 2 life sentences? That's insane. 2 life sentences plus 80 years for Ross Ulbricht. And it's because we don't embrace this as a simple ethical issue. Once we give government the power to say we can put you in jail, we can lock you up for a crime that has no victim, a false crime, we have all of these unintended consequences of the drug war, the war on poverty, and a system that means any one of you at any time can be mistaken for someone because a cop smelled weed on you, or whatever it is that they use as probable cause. I'm so glad that Arvin and Ken have mentioned jury nullification. This really comes down to what the people will put up with. Are we going to put up with seeing fellow Americans locked up when they're not hurting anybody, or are we going to stand up for each other's rights? Localization not only gets those policies of justice back in the hands of communities where they belong, but it gives us a system that allows us to keep people locked up who should be locked up as we localize down to the community level and we release from every jail, every prison in America, everybody who is there for victimless crimes.
We did invite John McAfee to be part of this debate, and he wanted to.
Declined for legal reasons?
Yes, he wasn't able to attend in person. And yes, Lynn, Ross's mother, Ulbricht, been in touch with. Free and Equal Elections, we actually signed a letter to support his clemency. So, yeah. Yes, I mean, as we grow our debates, we hope to incorporate more online live feeds, but we'll see. We do stick with people here in person, but an exception of not being able to be in the States is something we would definitely consider, having McAfee, and if anybody else has that situation as well. So yes, please, Howie, thank you for waiting.
Yeah, I've already indicated that I want to free and pardon political prisoners, especially whistleblowers. I think I use this opportunity to say how important the Julian Assange case is, because he published in WikiLeaks material that he got from Chelsea Manning that revealed war crimes by the United States government. That's why he's being prosecuted. And the consequences if he's found guilty under this Espionage Act is that the New York Times, the Washington Post, any publication in the world can be prosecuted by the United States for publishing information leaked by the government. He's an Australian, and we're prosecuting him here under the espionage law, which is a 1917 repressive law that related to World War I and was used to imprison people like Eugene Debs and A. Philip Randolph. And Chelsea Manning's paying, I think it's $1,000 a day fines for using her right to remain silent, which just indicates all these nameless people we don't talk about. 95% of cases when you're charged, it's a plea deal. You don't go to trial because you can't afford to and you can't beat the state. So we got a lot of people in prison that cop the things they didn't do. You heard about Khalif Browder, young man in the Bronx accused of stealing a backpack. He spent 3 years in Rikers. A lot of time in isolation, beat up by the guards, beat up by gangs. He ended up committing suicide once he got out. And they never charged him. 3 years in that Rikers Island. That's the criminal justice system we're talking about. So we got all those nameless victims. I'd also say there are a lot of Black Panthers. Some of them who did things, killed cops or robbed banks, but that was a long time ago, and they're serving more time than other people who did the similar crime because they were Black Panthers. Now they're elderly. They should be released on humanitarian grounds. We're holding these people much longer than other countries do. And then I got to say something about Trump's pardons. He's pardoning the wrong people. Racists like that sheriff down in Arizona and these white-collar crooks. He's trying to legalize white-collar corporate crime. Those people should not be pardoned until they serve their time.
Yes, on my first day in office, the first person I would pardon would be Julian Assange, followed quickly by Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning. I've got to admit, I need to look into Ross Ulbricht a little more. Of course, I have no problem with him selling drugs on the dark web, that's fine. My understanding is he was in prison for conspiracy to commit murder, so I will look into that. But there's plenty of time before the first day in office, so I will have researched that thoroughly by then. But I would like to point out that, yes, if there is no victim, there is no crime. So my first day in office from the federal prison, I would pardon all nonviolent drug offenders, all sex workers, and the problem with these laws, especially the drug laws and sex workers, is they're particularly harsh against minorities. It's one more built-in racist system that the government has. The government has been the biggest discriminator in the history of our country. The government has discriminated against blacks far more than companies have. And I'll talk about that more in my closing. But I would like to point out that in a free market, when you have to compete, you have to get people to voluntarily choose your service, voluntarily get something from you. You can't just force somebody to do something that you want them to do.
Berman.
I would certainly like to affirm my agreement that I believe that all of the mentioned political prisoners and whistleblowers should certainly be freed as in addition to all nonviolent and victimless crime people in prison. It's time that we do need to open the gates and free the people and overthrow or overhaul this criminal justice system, and I am just a few clicks away from total prison abolition. Thank you. BermanSupreme2020.com.
Well, we could squeeze in one more question. Oh, go ahead, Adam.
Well, just so I don't lose my chance to use my extra minute, if
This
that's
could
all
be
right.
the chance everybody uses their extra minute or at closing, so you have one left.
Was that our last question?
Well, I was going to propose if we wanted to do one more question, if we could have it at 1 minute, and the question would be about jury nullification if all candidates agree. Is that something?
We all agree on it.
Everybody cool with that? So we can go to 1 minute.
But I'll still take my rebuttal.
Okay, it'll be our final
Yeah.
rebuttal?
Yes.
Okay.
3 of 3 here.
All right.
No, I want to say I'm really glad that Mr. Charles is here, and I appreciate what you used your extra time for at the very beginning here, and I think it's, along with veteran suicides, a prime example of a national embarrassment that needs to end is the treatment of Native Americans in this country. It's not just something that we need to really rewrite all the history books on. It's something that we need to look at today and stand up to and say, we need something fundamentally different here. And I love how localization, the more I find I apply it to different issues, the better it gets. And with Native American tribes today, not only have so many treaties been violated, has so much land been stolen, but even today, as wards of the federal government, their rights are abused on a continual basis. And so I would put it to the entire panel, not just Mr. Charles here, but I think you would agree with me that tribal sovereignty is an extremely important issue. How many of the candidates, by show of hands, actually have a plan built into their platform to respect tribal sovereignty?
All right, so we'll do one more round, a minute, if that. Your take on jury nullification, please, Gloria.
I'd rather use that minute to talk about another issue of the justice system.
Sure.
And that is that the real criminals, those police who've gunned down so many thousands of young people, especially black and brown youth, who walk free, giving not only enjoying impunity, but then encouraging others to do the same and find the same pretext for why they killed another young person. To prosecute the prosecutors who knowingly hid information that led to false conviction of so many black men and Latinos and poor people in general, including poor white people. And there's plenty of examples of that, from Chicago to the beatings of all the people who were brutalized in those dungeons, to the hiding of the murder of Laquan McDonald. All those people need to be prosecuted and put in jail. That's real justice.
Mosey?
I also want to take this opportunity to share something, a positive message in our community. It started in Seattle, Washington, after a teenager committed suicide. Friends and family had no idea that this individual was at risk, and they designed these simple yard signs that are like any political sign you put in the ground with the metal stakes. On one side it says, "Don't give up," and on the other side it says, "You matter." And if you go to don'tgiveupsigns.org, or maybe don'tgiveupsigns.com, I beg your pardon, you can order packets of these signs, and they do have some grant funding. They have a bunch of positive messages: be kind always, you are worthy of love. And when I was campaigning in New Hampshire, I brought them up there, and their fire stations are addiction recovery or crisis response centers. And the chief of the assistant fire chief gave me permission to put one of those signs at each one of the fire stations. I think that's a message we can share around the country to improve our communities and improve everybody's well-being.
Thank you, Mosey. Zoltan?
Sure, I'd like to take my minute to speak a little bit about justice too, and something different than jury
Please,
nullification.
anyone. Go ahead.
And first, I also think Adam Kokesh misheard me. When there's not a victim, I do not believe that anyone should be prosecuted. In fact, I have some radical policies dealing with the prison system. I don't support private prisons whatsoever. I think that's the one thing that you need to be very careful of when you have incentive to keep people in jails. But beyond that, transhumanists, people that want to use science and technology, often want to get people that haven't committed anything violent out of prison whatsoever, whether it's drugs, whatever it is. If they haven't done anything violent to somebody, we don't even want to put them in prison whatsoever. However, there are times when even people that may have committed some violence don't need to go to prison. We could use different types of tracking mechanisms. The libertarians will dislike this greatly, but there are so many different new methods of keeping people in the work system, paying taxes, either through bracelets, either through drones, or different types of surveillance systems in their home that allow people to join the real world. Because if you don't know, once you go to prison, you intermix with people that are very violent, and it ends up kind of harming you. It ends up making you kind of, in many ways, mentally unstable because you're dealing with criminals all day. The best policy is to get people out of prison back into the real world. And if they're violent or something like that, there are other methods to, essentially keep them safe in society while also still paying taxes. So that's been a huge policy of mine that I've written a lot about at Vice and other places as well.
Ken?
Well, I think we've talked a little bit about the fact that there are plenty of people who have violated the law and we consider them heroes. And yet, in almost every courtroom in the United States, if a lawyer says to the jury, yes, he violated the law, but I'm encouraging you to find him innocent, that's called jury nullification. In some states, the lawyer can actually be disbarred for that. In many states, they can be sanctioned for it. And the judge might even declare a mistrial or might have to admonish the jury or some sort of thing. I believe that in this country, if a jury says no harm, no foul, the law should serve the people, not the other way around.
Adam?
Well, I already mentioned that jury nullification is a great check on government power. We can take away that consent by voting not guilty for victimless crimes or for any time we feel as a jury member that the person on trial shouldn't be locked up. Simple as that. But I want to take this opportunity to speak to something I think is much more important as we wrap this debate up. We see a bunch of different perspectives on this stage, and we're kind of arguing over issues, explaining our differences and preferences, but we are all well-intentioned people. I know what it takes to be on the stage as a presidential candidate to say, I'm going to be the one to be in charge of this massive monstrosity. And I don't think we should be doing this at all. I don't think we should be arguing about issues. I think there's a different paradigm of respect for people wanting to have different communities to live in. Gloria presents a very different idea of what she wants the world to look like than even Mark. Vermin, obviously, who wants to live in a free pony community. I mean, I might choose to live there, right? Joe, Howie, Ken, Zoltan, and Mosey all present different views. If you want to live in the world that they describe, I want you to have that right. The only way everybody gets what they want here is localization.
Howie?
Before I get to jury nullification, I left out one category of pardons that Trump is doing that should not be done, and that is pardoning war criminals. So, jury nullification, I've been involved in that through the anti-nuclear movement in New England, going back to the 70s. We had things like knocking down a weather testing tower. Sam Lovejoy, there's a film about it called Sam Lovejoy's Nuclear War. The jury let him off on the competing harms theory. He clearly did it. He said, I did it, but it was worse that they were building this nuclear power plant. And then about 10 years later, the guy that gave the Clamshell Alliance its name, that was our anti-nuclear alliance, Guy Chichester, invoked a clause in the New Hampshire Constitution, the right of revolution. And after over 200 years, a jury used that to let him off. And I think it should be policy that lawyers can instruct the jury. You have the right to nullify on the theory that what they did is not worth putting them in jail, even if it technically violated the law.
Thank you. Go.
Well, I'm going to follow suit of a couple of the other people and talk about what I want to talk about instead of answering the question.
Please.
I really feel that healthcare is one of the most important issues that we have. It is literally life or death. And we're about to turn everything over to an incompetent, inefficient government that takes away people's rights. And if you look at the Democrats and Republicans debating, you'll see that what they're arguing about is how do we pay for this overbloated system, for the system that costs too much, instead of looking at how do we get the costs down. And the socialists are saying we need to turn everything over to government. Well, we already, over half of our healthcare costs are through the government. In fact, the more we've turned healthcare over to the government, the higher the prices have gone. And just to give you one example, state mandates. In Michigan, you could not sell a health insurance policy if it didn't have hair plugs. So if you're a poor person, you know, there's no cheap version of healthcare insurance you can pay because, once again, the special interests have paid off the politicians. Okay.
Oh, all right.
I'll stop when it says stop.
Berman.
Jury of nullification, yes, and I'd like to read to you the preamble of the Libertarian platform. As libertarians, we seek a world of liberty, a world in which all individuals are sovereign over their own lives and are not forced to sacrifice their values for the benefits of others. We believe that respect for individual rights is an essential precondition for a free and prosperous world, that force and fraud must be banished from human relationships, and that only through freedom can peace and prosperity be realized. Consequently, we defend each person's right to engage in any activity that is peaceful and honest, and welcome the diversity that freedom brings. The world we seek to build is one where individuals are free to follow their own dreams in their own ways without interference from government or any authoritarian power. Our goal is nothing more or less than a world set free in our lifetime. That's all. I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you. lp.org/platform. Thank you.
Mark.
I'm wearing my Sieth, my Navajo bun tied with red yarn, to remind myself of a crisis in Indian country known as missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, where we have hundreds, literally thousands of Indigenous women and girls who have gone missing and been murdered. And not only have their cases not been closed, in many cases they've never been opened. Their families don't know where they are. Federal agencies have never followed up. Police departments have never followed up. They're just missing and murdered. When I was at the Frank Lemire Native American Presidential Forum with many of the Democratic candidates, they asked each of us about this crisis, and most of the candidates responded by saying that they would have this new law or this new policy to protect this vulnerable demographic. But when they asked me the question, I told them that when your Declaration of Independence refers to natives as savages and your Constitution never mentions women, you should not be surprised when your Indigenous women go missing or get murdered and society doesn't care. A new law isn't going to fix this. We need a new basis for our laws. That's where the problem lies.
All right, well, closing statements.
Well, can I get my minute?
Oh, yes. You have one left. My apology,
Thank
please.
you. Somebody had mentioned about women getting paid 60 to 70 cents for every dollar, and I just want to point out that this is one of the biggest statistical hoaxes out there. If you look at the research, you'll see that women are actually paid closer to 95 cents out of every dollar if you hold everything else constant. For instance, one article showed that women pharmacists didn't make as much money as as male pharmacists, and so therefore it wasn't fair. Well, if you look into it closely, you see that the male pharmacists were working like 4 to 6 hours a week more. Of course they're going to get paid more. When they look at men versus women doctors, they don't take specialization into account. I had a friend who was a dermatologist who went into dermatology so she could work fewer hours, be home at 3 o'clock to take her kids home from work. She is not going to make as much money as a surgeon. Surgeons get paid more, they work longer hours. By choice, only about 19% of the medical profession of the surgeons are women. So of course, if there are different jobs, they are going to get paid differently.
Thank you. Adam,
But,
ready?
I know I don't have any time left, but I just want to point out that Vermin has 3 minutes and he has a bag full of glitter. I don't want either to go to waste tonight.
I mean, you do have 3 rebuttals, Vermin, so you could use them or just, yeah.
I'm good.
Okay, that's good, so. All right, anybody else? We're good? All right, so we're gonna move towards our closing statements. And since I had Mosey start with the opening, we kind of added one in there really short. I'm gonna start with Gloria on the closing statement, 2 minutes each. Thank you.
In the modern era, in the world we live in, around the world, everything that we consume, use, everything on our clothes, the transportation we take, the books we read, the movies we watch, everything is produced by literally thousands of hands, thousands of workers in collective social production. Everything. The problem is the private ownership, where you can have a company like Walmart. One family owns the wealth of Walmart, while hundreds of thousands of workers produce all the goods, perhaps actually millions because of all the products in that store. But by their private ownership under capitalism, they have dictatorial power. That's the real dictatorship we live in, the dictatorship of capitalism, where those bosses, those owners of all these corporations can decide whether you will live or die, whether you will be homeless the next month. And yet all of what we produce and eat is produced by the workers. The problem, again, is the private ownership, so that now, as capitalism has continued and monopoly has intensified, you have 6 individuals, all from the US, who own half the wealth of the world. They own as much wealth as half the population of the world. And poverty is growing. The same thing can be said about wealth and poverty in the United States. There are 17 million homes that are empty in the United States. Maybe 500,000, it's been estimated, that are homeless. Perhaps millions more who are underhoused, who are hidden homeless. But that's why we say under socialism, everybody should be given a home, regardless of ability to pay. And why? Because the workers built those homes. The problem is ownership. One example, Jared Kushner owns 9,000 apartments in Baltimore and trying to evict those people. How many did he build? 0. The workers made those homes. Mm-hmm. Socialism.
Thank you, Gloria. Mosey.
I believe in faith, service to others, and personal responsibility. I am running for president to rebuild patriotism by uniting Americans around our shared values. I am very grateful to have the privilege of running for president of the United States. I think that is a wonderful blessing that our country and our Constitution afford us that right. And I want to thank everyone who's participating in the process this year and every year, everyone who's voting, everyone who's registered to vote, everyone who's knocking on doors, everybody who's making calls on behalf of candidates, everybody who's speaking out for what they believe in, writing letters to the editor. I am grateful that we have so many Americans who care deeply about our country and the well-being of our fellow citizens and is willing to participate in this process. And for those who feel left out and who feel like their voices don't matter, I want to encourage you to give it a try, to speak out, to find an opportunity to share what you believe in, even if it's just with your friend or perhaps even just in your own journal. but express yourself. Learn how to put a voice to what you believe in. That's how we can find solutions. And I also encourage every one of us to listen to each other, because sometimes I'm not going to know all the information that you know, and you might not know all the information I know. And working together, I believe that we will find a better solution to many of our nation's challenges and to many of our communities' challenges. When we work together, we listen to each other, we take some time to find some common ground. So thank you all for participating.
Zoltan.
I have based much of my career on a single concept, the scientific method. I believe that the best way to run a nation and the best way to run local governments and the best way essentially to run anything is through the scientific method. Currently, most politicians are either running it through maybe potentially their religious interpretations, their ethnicity, their career-mindedness, their, it could be anything, even their emotional psyche. But I would plan to run the presidency through a very strict sense of logic, using the scientific method where you basically compare something to another thing and make sure it works. It's almost like algorithms. In fact, this is one of the reasons why, as wild as this sounds, Silicon Valley is working on artificial intelligence, and there's a very good chance within 20 years' time we'll have an AI that's smarter than people. There may someday even come a point when the president is a machine. I mean, Elon Musk is working on a company, Neuralink, that's directly already, he's going to have human trials next year, that they're going to connect your brain into the cloud so you can in real time think about things. But that kind of methodology, that kind of new world that we're speaking of, can't get there just through irrationality or because you have too many hormones going on. It can only get there because we make very, very logical decisions for the best society, the greatest good for society. And that's how I've been running both my campaign as well as the articles that I write, as well as my entire presidential campaign. And I hope you'll think a little bit about what it means to use the scientific method in your life to live better. Thanks so much.
Ken.
Albert Einstein's definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting to get a different result. And for the last 60 years, we've been going over the net with the tennis ball back and forth from one of the two major parties to the other, reassuring ourselves that when the ball gets on the other side of the net, finally, we'll be saved from all of the horrible stuff that government has been doing. And it has been getting progressively worse and worse. Now the question is, what's the solution to that? And we've heard a lot of ideas here at the table tonight. We've heard people who say, get rid of the whole federal government, just get rid of the whole thing, they're the problem, get rid of them. And we've heard people who said, give the federal government more power. That'll solve all of the problems that the federal government has caused. If a little bit of poison was bad, give them more poison, and that'll solve all of our problems. I do believe in the noble beauty of the Constitution. I don't believe it's perfect. We've talked about some of the huge flaws in it, but I do believe in the noble beauty of empowering the people of this country to solve their own problems and get the government off your back.
Adam.
The federal government of the United States of America has become extremely corrupted, extremely destructive, extremely overgrown, extremely anti-community, and extremely effective at ripping us off. To keep this system going would be extremely irresponsible. What we need is a moderate, practical, unifying solution to the challenges that we face today. And that's what localization is. It comes down to a matter of trust. Do you trust the federal government to protect your rights, to provide for you, to keep you safe? Or do you trust your community, your neighbors, yourself? Do you trust freedom, which is nonviolence, respect for individual rights? Or do you trust the violence and coercion of authority. This message of localization speaks to everyone, from soccer moms to Bernie bros to the deplorables, because the more local government is, the more customized it is. That's why last year a Republican Idaho state representative was caught accidentally plagiarizing me in a speech that he was giving to Republicans. That's why Cynthia McKinney, 6-time Democratic Congresswoman from Atlanta and the Green Party nominee for president in 2008, has endorsed me and this platform. Localization appeals to everyone. Even Donald Trump said that he would vote for me as long as he could be a president of a state with no Muslims or Mexicans. Localization is the cure for polarization because everyone gets what they want. Let's give every American what they want and overthrow the duopoly. Thank you very much. Don't forget to vote freeandequal.org. For people watching online, I hope to have your vote and your support tonight. My website is thefreedomline.com. And if you want to join the party of principle, please go to lp.org.
Thank you, Adam, for the plug there. Howie.
Well, as I said in my introduction, we're running a national campaign to get on the ballots of all 50 states and D.C. with the Green Party and trying to build solidarity on the independent left. You can go to our website, howiehawkins.us, if you want to get involved. And the purpose of that national campaign is to put our demands into the national debate, make the Democrats and Republicans deal with what we're talking about. And I'm